There it is. It's done. Everybody can hear now. My name is Henry Gatus. I have been a JBANC member of the board since 1998. I am presently this year's chairman of the board, and part of my duties that are assigned to me is to commence the afternoon session, and that's the easy part. The hard part is I have to introduce you to your uncle or your godfather. That's Paul Goebel. This is the activist panel, and nobody more epitomizes a Baltic activist, even though he's not from the Baltic, than Paul Goebel. I met him when I first came on board, and I've done about 5 or 6 plannings of such conferences. And the first thing we plan is who the big speaker is. The second thing is where we're going to use Paul Goebel. He's our mainstay. Anytime we need a man, he's the guy. I'm a Lithuanian American. One of our great heroes is Thaddeus Kosciuszko. He was the 18th century American patriot, Lithuanian patriot, Polish patriot. And he led the democracy movement around the world. If there is a reincarnation of Thaddeus Kosciuszko today, that's Paul Goebel. And I'm going to turn it over to Paul and retire right now.
Thank you for those overly generous comments. It's an enormous pleasure for me to be here. It's especially a pleasure this week. Our house burned earlier, and I have been struggling with fires, insurance agents, and engineers, and it's much more fun and even easier to work with bolts than it is with insurance agents, which tells you something about insurance agents, perhaps nothing about bolts. I'm particularly pleased, as anyone would be, coming to such a session in seeing so many old friends here. But in many ways, I'm even more pleased to see faces I don't recognize. One of the problems over the last 20 or 25 years is that Baltic American meetings have gotten smaller and smaller, with the same people attending and fewer of them, and that while we noted in many occasions in the past that the meetings were in better hotels, the people who were attending were also older. So it's good to see new faces, because I will have something to say in the next panel. I think there's probably greater room for Baltic American activism over the next generation than in the last 20 years. In many respects, Baltic Americans have had their very own end of history moment. The assumption that, which was widespread in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, that the getting into NATO, getting into the European Union sort of represented the end of history, and there was nothing more to be done. Clearly, there is a great deal more to be done, and one of the things that this panel will focus on is exactly what we have ahead of us. This panel will be limited to 60 minutes. And I will be ruthless in insisting that each speaker take no more than 10. I will reserve my comments to the end. Because you have the bios of the speakers in front of you, I don't think we need to repeat them, but I would like to ask each speaker to briefly say where he or she was, what he or she was doing in 1991, 20 years ago, when all of this began, and what they are doing now, just as a way in. To show what I have in mind and the brevity with which I hope it will be followed by others, I will say that in 1991, I was the desk officer for Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania at the U.S. Department of State, and special assistant for Soviet nationalities and Baltic affairs to the Secretary of State. Today I am retired, and I now produce my blog, Window on Eurasia, some of you may know, and I live now, and it's now really full-time, in Stanton, Virginia, a place where a traffic jam means you've seen another car that day. Our first speaker will be Mel Huang, and I will allow him to introduce himself that way. Please come up. You have 10 minutes.
Too many chairs. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed that lunch. My name is Mel Huang. Some of you may remember me from the old days. I was here at JBANC back in 1995, 1996. It was a very strange time because 1995, there was the question, what is JBANC's raison d'etre? Troop withdrawal had happened. Occupation was essentially over. So where does JBANC go? Where does the community need to where would they need to play a role? The question then wasn't NATO. NATO was a pipe dream. No one ever believed NATO was a possibility at that time. So that was one of the most difficult times, I think, for JBANC's recent history. And I'm very glad to see 15 years later that, well, again, hotels may be better and the food, well, I won't comment on food, but I'm glad to see a lot of new faces and that JBANC has been reinvigorated with more energy, in a way, a new mission as well. Just to go back to answer what Paul was saying earlier, what I was doing in 1991, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this now because I was just finishing high school in 1991 and going to college at the time when everything began. And my path to the Baltics really seriously came then, because when I started in university, it was impressed upon me that I can actually make a living doing this kind of thing, which is now I know sadly not true. But for 10 plus years I've believed it, and I've worked on the Baltics since basically the early 1990s, from an academic, from a journalistic, and from a undescribable point of view, I guess that's the best way to put it. I've worked under Paul for 2 years, writing a lot of the Newsline articles, which was quite a pleasure, but also a challenge because at the time when I started, I had not known much Estonian, and Paul basically said, look at that Sakbak dictionary, learn the language, or you lose your job. So I learned it. So thank you, Paul. Tough love.
That's tough love.
Anyway, one of the things I wanted to talk about today is, okay, JBANC is 50 years old. JBANC has, again, survived the successes of the Baltic states. I think we have to emphasize that the reason that JBANC, for a while, there was that feel of shrinking, threatening its existence, is because of how well the Baltics actually did. It was succeeding itself out of a job, in a way, because democracy came, occupation ended. And to this stage, I mean, we just had recently Eesti Energia, the Estonian power company, making a huge investment in the US. So ironically now, you have foreign direct investment by Estonia into the US. So for years and years, Estonian former prime minister asked for trade, not aid. Now you have bilateral, a very balanced bilateral trade. So in a way, what does JBANC do now? Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are solidly in NATO, EU members in a Schengen zone as well. Estonia is now also OECD. There's really nothing else you can join, frankly, at this point that's necessary. I'm not sure the Arab League is useful for Estonia, so there's no more chasing memberships. So in a way, what does JBANC do now? Does it use its experience to help other captive nations? For example, I know there's a lot of our Circassian friends here today, Belarusian friends. There's still a lot of problems in Moldova, Georgia, the so-called neighbors of the current EU. And where does JBANC go from this point? And does it focus that new mission to try to take all of our collective experience from working on issues such as restoring independence, something very basic, just gaining your freedom, to the point of getting troops out, dealing with the Russians, integrating with European institutions. So basically, I think that's where the next 50 years of JBANC should go. And I think collectively we have the experience, having fought through some of these most difficult battles. One thing very interesting about this panel is, out of all of us here, I think all of us have spent quite a bit of time living in the Baltics. which is if Terry shows up on Skype, she also spent 10 years in Helsinki. You may remember her from her CNN days reporting. And I think that's one of the things that also I think I want to impress on people is that these countries, they've evolved at a speed that you would not believe. When I was living there, there was always this, I leave for a week and there's a new building. There's something new. And I think that's one of the things that Baltic Americans should also do is maybe, I know President Ilves has recently called for everyone to go home basically to help contribute to the building of a modern Estonia. I think maybe not going as far, but I think there should be more engagement that Estonia is a wonderful country that's developed beyond perhaps what the collective memory of what Estonia was that you learned for years and years and years. That is a growing society, evolving society, and is developed. All three countries, same thing. And I think the better cultural dialogues that are there in all generations, not just from the young generation, whichever generation. I think that is something that JBANC and the three organizations should play a role as well, because that is the most important aspect, I think, of JBANC now, because the political game is pretty much set. But the point of these organizations is to make sure that the community stays strong and the influence remains in case something happens in the future.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
If everyone is as disciplined as Mel, we'll have time for questions and we can attack people. Next speaker will be Marianne Keller. Marianne?
Thank you, Paul. It's good to have you in charge. I know your ruthless methods will bring great fruit. 10 minutes is a very short amount of time to tell you what's on my mind and in my brain and in my heart, but I'll give it a try. And I'll start out just with two small reminiscences before I go into the actual topic. The first is a memory of being in Estonia in 1990 and meeting with some members of the Congress of Estonia in the lobby of the Viru Hotel. I'm a person that always notices what's going on around me, and I started noticing that we're sitting there having a conversation, and more men with newspapers under their arms were joining us in the lobby of the Viru Hotel, sitting on one sofa or another chair, all of them just very intently reading their newspapers. This obviously gave me the creeps, and I pointed it out to the gentleman I was with. I said, lower your voices, and there were some people joining us. This was followed by the fact that it was very hard to get taxi cabs at that time in Estonia, but when we left the hotel, immediately 2 cabs pulled up. Oh, you need a ride? We said, no, thank you, we're walking. The other sort of creepy experience I had, and I haven't had very many, luckily, was in the time of the cyber war. I was at home sending frantically emails everywhere, letting people know what was going on, keeping them up, because there was no Twitter then. And I was getting these little noises on my computer. Ping, 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 ping. It was something called intrusion reports. And so even on my little home computer, there was a massive attack. Something was trying to invade my personal computer. That was very, very strange. I wasn't a government institution or anything. So just these 2 things for background to remember where we have been and what's behind us. I have good news and bad news for you. Good news is we Balts have an amazing story. And it's a good story to tell because we have not only sincerity and truth and justice and the love of God on our side, but we also have many personal survivor stories even yet today. Makes us very believable, and the story itself is one of peace and deliberation and working hard using legal and political methods, no violence. The bad news is Our job is not done, and it never will be. Not only do we have to continue to work to ensure that Baltic liberty remains viable in this world, that our three democracies remain functioning and strong democracies, but we have to help others that are in a worse situation than we are. And we've been hearing about many of them today and yesterday, from Belarus, Moldova, Circassians, so many other countries even beyond Europe that could use our help. And by repeating our message about injustice and the result of having to live under authoritarian or communist regimes, we can help support the message that those people who still need help are giving the world. We can reinforce their message and help to nudge them toward freedom. I think one of the smartest things that Baltz ever did was to form JBANC, because united we stand, divided we fall, and with cooperation we immediately zoomed our numbers up from 75,000 Estonian Americans and a few more Latvian Americans and a lot of Lithuanians. Together we ended up being 1 million Baltic Americans, which is already a lobby that Washington will pay attention to. And this was an effective way to get our message out and to win new friends. The next thing we did was to reach out to the other captive nations and to other people who had issues with the Soviet Union, to form an even stronger alliance and network and to gain more voters, really, in America, to have us have an effect on the American government. One person can make a real difference in this country. It's really true. But it helps if you have numbers behind you. And we were able to get up to 1 million strong Baltic Americans. I'm going to hearken to what President Zottler said about awareness promotion. This is our job. Awareness promotion. Not only of Baltic issues, but as I said, of all the other issues, of all the other, still, what we can call captive nations. Nations that are not free, that are suffering and about to lose their identity. Whether it's Tibet or Belarus, they are all our brothers and they need our support. We have to use the three things that President Zottler's pointed out: cooperation, coordination, and networking. And with that, we can increase our numbers and our effectiveness. It is so important that the younger generations continue the battle. When we used to be picketing at the Soviet embassy, often I would be on the bullhorn and we would be leading the cheers, "Niet, niet, Soviet." And we would have kids with us. And I would have to fill up the time, so I'd run a little jargon through the bullhorn, and I would say things like, "Hey, you're looking out here. It's not just old people. Look around. There are young people here. There are little children here. We're all going to be here until Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are free." And just talking, but I know they were listening. And it's true. The young people are still participating, perhaps less effectively, less actively, because they think everything's okay now, and it isn't. The job is not done. But we still do have young people participating. Many of them are here today, and some are here today asking for our help. We hope we can help them. And in this case, I have a personal example. When, with the help of Mr. Jim Morrison that you're going to be hearing later today, people organized a demonstration in Bedford at the D-Day Memorial against the Stalin bust. A couple of little babies showed up, my grandkids. My daughter went to the demonstration and took those two kids with her. So what I warned the Soviet embassy, that we will never give up, and we will have our younger generation continue the battle, is coming true. The other reason we cannot give up yet is because the crimes of communism have never been condemned properly, and the perpetrators have not been brought to trial, or at least made accountable in some way for their actions. We need to work on this issue. This is not something from the past. So much of our future is based on having the crimes of communism acknowledged and dealt with. They're working on this very hard in the European Parliament, where my husband is kind of leading the charge, but it's still a long way to go, and we need to work on it. When I was just recently in Israel, we visited the Holocaust Museum with a whole group of European parliamentarians. It was very effective, very moving. And yet, when I came out, I was thinking, you know, so much of what I saw in this museum applies to what happened to Estonia, to Latvia, and Lithuania. And I said something to that effect to the Belgian senator who was next to me. And she said, "Oh, did something happen in Estonia?" A Belgian senator. A similar thing happened a few years ago with my husband and an Austrian parliamentarian. The people just do not know, and we need to inform and to get this issue put right. Then we will not have to deal with busts of Stalin adorning and ruining a D-Day memorial. And Paul just tells me I have 2 minutes. That's great. I thought I was over with already.
Not yet.
So my main message to you today is continue what you have been doing. It's better than sitting around watching television anyway. Continue to reach out and inform, and those of you who have personal memories, share them. Every time I meet a new American, almost every time, this person will tell me, "Oh, I went to school with somebody who was from Estonia," or "Somebody I worked with was from Latvia," or "The man across the street is from Lithuania." This is the key, because we, I think, here in the United States always knew that our people were in danger of being wiped out culturally and politically and linguistically and in every way. We made a point of saying who we are, what our roots are. We can't stop doing this. We have to work on awareness promotion. We have to cooperate, coordinate, network, and to use every possible opportunity. I will just remind you, when we were shouting "Niet, Niet, Soviet" at the embassy, then one time I thought, gee, this is so negative. And we added, "Da, da, svoboda." The accent is wrong, but it rhymes. And I think that that's the kind of thing we have to keep in mind, that we're against totalitarianism, we want the truth about history, and we want this brighter future that the Baltic states already are achieving, but nothing is guaranteed yet. So I'm counting on all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Our next speaker is Yanis Kukainis.
Well, to start out, I hope I can over my awe at being included on this distinguished panel, because I only last Saturday moved up from the B list to this panel. Carl moved me up last Saturday, so thank you. In 1991, I was manager of advanced concepts engineering at the Ford Motor Company, and my job was to work with the design studios and to look at what kind of technologies were going to be used in vehicles in 10, 15 years. I was active in the Baltic community, and I followed everything, but my main concern was my oldest daughter had started college, and I was wondering how I was going to pay for her and the next two. So that's where I was in 1991. In 1991 and 1999, I retired from Ford Motor Company, and then since then I've been a full-time, this is what I do, this is my hobby, being a full-time Baltic activist. A couple things about, here's a little story about JBANC. JBANC, but it wasn't just active, and its long tentacles weren't only here in America, but if you remember 1974, Australia recognized the legality of the occupation of the Baltic states. And at that time, JBANC found out in the middle of the night that this was occurring, and the next morning they were already on the steps of the embassy here in Washington and so on, and the embassy hadn't even heard of it. And because of our activism, our compatriots in Australia, they rescinded that, the recognition that the occupation was legal. So that's JBANC's far reach. I think JBANC, the big thing is we've always been united, and I can just about the recent NATO ascension and so on. There were, before Jesse Helms' speech in 1991, and then again on September 10th at the American Enterprise Institute, there was always talk. The Lithuanians were always doing something behind our backs. They were going to get into NATO without the Balts. It wasn't united. The Estonians were doing something, again, with the Finns and so on, because they were half Finnish, and the poor old Latvians were in the middle. They had no one, maybe except the Russians. But the biggest thing was NATO, JBANC was always united, okay? And I think we can say that for other Baltic organizations like Batun and maybe the Baltic American Freedom League. We were always united, right? And the thing is, even pre-JBANCs, again, historical facts, the unity of the Baltic community. I come from Detroit and so on, but we already in the late 1950s, on the 16th of February, above Detroit City Hall was the Lithuanian flag. On the 24th of February was the Estonian flag. On the 18th of November was the Latvian flag. We were united. In 1959 and 60, we had the murderer Anastas Mikoyan, who was on the Politburo. He was in Detroit. We were active, and we got it so that Jerry Kavanaugh, the mayor, said he was busy. He wouldn't see it. And the same thing was with Frau Kozlow, who was deputy on the Politburo and deputy assistant to Nikita Khrushchev. So anyway, we've been united. We've also been very successful at leveraging. I always hear 900,000 Lithuanians, about 100,000 Latvians, 50,000 Estonians. Whenever I go out, back in the old days, no one knew what a Latvian was and so on. So when I talk to a politician, I represent 22 million Americans, from the Rust Belt who take and vote. And we've been able to leverage that. The Balts have always leveraged that. We've had to do the work in these Captive Nations Committee and the Michigan Nationalities Council and so on. We were the workers. And the Ukrainians would go along with it, but we need the Ukrainians because of their numbers. Again, we were successful. Like in Michigan, we had President Reagan at the Ukrainian Center twice while he was president, as an example. I think the Latvians, we're still organized, but we're assimilating and so on. And I think Latvians are organized worldwide, the World Federation of Free Latvians, but we're putting more pressure, trying to put more pressure on changes in Latvia. Because rule of law still, and I could speak, isn't a word in Latvian. What Keith Smith said, I think that hit home. These boards and so on, and these semi-private corporations, it's still, there's no transparency. Conflict of interest is not corruption, and so on and so on. So I have to work on that, because that is one of the big barriers to more economic involvement from the states. It's even going so far, I think, that Estonian company right now about tugboats and so on is suing Latvia. I mean, come on. And there's obviously, beside that, lack of transparency and corruption. But the biggest thing, my concern is the future. And the future is right here. It has to be in America. They can talk about all these other countries. The only guarantor of Baltic independence, to me, is the United States of America. We have to continue to be active here. And my concern is the future. We are doing what we can on our part. I can speak more for the Latvian Society. The American Latvian Association sponsors young people going to Latvia. They have to study a year about Latvia, and then they go again to promote cultural ties in the future. We've also, the Michigan Baltic Committee, by the way, they paid for 20, 30, or 40 of these young people here to attend. We paid for their, what I'm trying to translate from Latvian. We paid their fees, so I'd like to hear some feedback. But we are worth gold as an organized as an organized group, and what I want to get from our countries, and specifically I'm speaking about Latvians, they have no strategic plan what to do with us. I mean, we're worth gold. Other countries, other nations envy us how well we're organized, that we have a Baltic caucus in the Senate, a Baltic caucus in the House, that we can take and put pressure on the, not pressure, you know, through the way the American grassroots pressure on our congressmen and so on to help meet our goals. I think that our governments, it's time that they, and when I say our governments, I mean the Baltic governments in particular, they have to get put together a strategic plan, how we can drag out this diaspora as long as possible, because we are worth gold to them. I think some of them don't recognize it because they don't really have the big picture. Partially, it's partially I believe it's envy on the parts of the government, but they definitely need to have a strategic plan, what to do with us, how to indoctrinate our young people and so on, so that they have a tie, a bind to our ancestral homeland. It's in my genes, but it's not in their genes. It needs training, and I think it needs people. I'm an engineer, but it needs people. It needs political scientists, political economists, and cultural people who understand this, and who can take and who can break this home. And this has to come from, I believe, the first part has to come from the countries, and specifically, like, say, from the Latvian foreign ministry. Oh, they're busy. They got all kinds of people sitting there. Someone could put together a strategic plan or something and start this dialogue. Because our young people, our people have to be told by our ancestral countries that they're important. 2 minutes. I could still talk, but that's enough. Thank you.
This may be the most effective piece of paper I have ever moved, if that's the case. Our next speaker is Edward Lucas. Edward, please.
Well, thanks very much, Paul. I think this time 20 years ago, I was failing to show up to a breakfast that we'd arranged. You very kindly rescheduled, and we've been friends ever since. 20 years ago, I was reading Marianne Ricken, then Callum Now's briefing notes on what was going on in Estonia. I was hanging out with Victor Narkas and Asta Banionis at the Lithuanian-American community, and many other people here. And it's great to see so many familiar faces from 20 years ago. I was actually briefly based in Washington then. I'd been living in the Baltic states, and my then employer, The Independent, hiked me out of the Baltic states to come and spend a few months in Washington covering the Pentagon and American foreign policy, particularly on the Gulf War, but also on the US-Soviet stuff. And I then went back to the Baltics and ran a newspaper called the Baltic Independent, which sold a lot of copies outside the Baltic states to members of the different diasporas. And that was fun. And this time, 10 years ago, I was the Moscow bureau chief of The Economist, covering the only time that I've believed that the Baltic states should come under Moscow was when I was the Moscow bureau chief, and I was insisting that I'd take the Baltic states with me from my previous posting in Berlin. So I'm a kind of walking embodiment of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. That I first of all, I ran the Baltics from Berlin, then from Moscow. I now run them from London. So I hope you join the Commonwealth soon. That'd be great. I want to talk about 3 N's. It's narrative, networks, and neighbours that I want to talk about. I think it goes without saying that you've done a fantastic job in ensuring the consolidation of the security, political, economic, social, cultural statehood and reconstituted countries. And that's a great achievement. It would be very easy just to declare victory and go home and watch telly, but I think that would be too early. The narrative is not yet set in stone. You know, if you stand up and say that there were no gas chambers at Auschwitz, people get really, really angry. It is unacceptable outside the far fringes of politics to question the Holocaust. If you say that Hitler had a good side, he built a lot of motorways, he was a strong leader, he restored the German people's pride in himself, in some countries you go to jail for that. I don't agree with it. I'm against any kind of restriction on historical discussion. But the narrative on large chunks of history is set. French Revolution, good. You might disagree, but anyway, that's, you try telling the French that the people who stormed the Bastille were hooligans. They won't like it. You try telling the Brits that their wartime role is not as heroic as they think it was. We remember in Britain, well, a bit like the Russians really, we remember the Great Patriotic War. We remember the Battle of Britain, the Normandy landings. It's very good. We tend to forget Yalta, appeasement, and some of the things that happened after the war. But the narrative on the Baltic states is not yet set. We see it with the Stalin bust. We see it every day on Wikipedia, and I'd really urge you, regard Wikipedia and the social networking sites as the front line of the war to keep independence, because you see all the time there the Russian activists, the paid Russian activists, going in there and trying to change things. It's all part of this big psychological warfare exercise that Russia is doing to try and demoralize and delegitimize the Baltic states and weaken the achievements of the last 20 years. So, and don't just do this in English, and don't just do it in Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian. If you possibly can, get onto the Russian version of Wikipedia and get stuck in there as well. It's really badly needed. And if you have other languages, go for that as well. So the narrative is really important. And we have new weapons in that narrative. There's great books coming out now and great films. I know that The Sing Revolution did a very good job in putting the Estonian story there. Katyn is a great film. It's actually about Poland, everything that happened there. If you're Latvian, you know about Lithuania. If you're Estonian, Lithuanian, these things happened in your countries too. So try and organize a film screening, get people to come and watch Katyn. There's a great new children's book just come out. Hands up who's heard of Between Shades of Grey. Get that book. It's really good. I've got Natalia, it's actually there on my desk. Stand up. That's the cover. I bought the last copy at Kramer Books today, but I'm sure there are others. It's through the eyes of a 15-year-old girl talking about the deportations. It's a really impressive book. So we've got, and that moves me on to the networking. We have weapons that we couldn't have dreamt of 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I was filing from the Baltic states by telex. Hands up everybody who remembers the telex machine. For the younger people here, telex was a narrowband, hardwired point-to-point email system. I try to translate it into modern. We have Twitter now. We have Facebook. We have Skype. We have amazing abilities to network with each other and get that narrative across. The third end is neighbours. I'm delighted to see the Circassians here. It's fantastic. I wish we had Tibetans here as well. One thing we can do that would really help, the Dalai Lama is visiting the Baltic states. He's visiting Estonia this summer. And I've been running a kind of little one-person campaign just to make absolutely sure that he gets to meet senior Estonian politicians. And they're curiously uneasy. There's a kind of, I'm going to be, I won't not mention any names here, but, I'm going to be pretty busy then, and, maybe there's going to be some other things going on, and China's very important. And I'm saying, look, guys, this stuff's indivisible. So this is something I think the diaspora can be really helpful, just saying, hey, when did you last meet the Dalai Lama? Yeah, are we going to forget about Tibet? Are we going to let the world forget about Tibet the way that the world used to forget about us? We know how that feels. We don't like it. We're not going to let that happen. So Tibet and Circassians. But actually, most of all, Russia. Now, I know mentioning Russia at a JBANC conference is a bit like coming to the vampires with the garlic, or maybe it's coming to the garlic farmers as a vampire. But anyway, I'm one of every 31st of each month, there's a demonstration all around the world. It's in Moscow, and it's outside of every Russian embassy and consulate, in defense of Article 31 of the Russian Constitution, which is the article that guarantees freedom of assembly. And every month, not every month has a 31st, but in the months that do, they demonstrate on Pushkin Square, and they get arrested. It's Kafkaesque. You're arrested for demonstrating in support of the constitutional article that says you can demonstrate. And so we have demonstrations in London on the 31st. And I turned up there on the 31st I can't remember if it was in fall last year. And I took a banner along, and I said, I'm not going to just put in Russian, Za vashu nashu svobodu, for your freedom and ours. I'm going to write in Estonian as well. Now, my Estonian isn't very good, so luckily I checked it. I don't think the Estonian friend to get it right. And this small band of Russians there, many of whom I've known since 1980, they were so happy to see someone there with a banner in Estonian supporting their struggle. I did it again a couple of months later, and I had it in Lithuanian, and I'll do it in Latvian next. The photo of, in fact, my teenage sons, one of whom was born in Estonia, holding this banner, which saying it in Estonian and Russian, for your freedom and ours, it went straight back to Moscow, and it was a news item in Moscow. And that evening, I got a phone call from Boris Nemtsov, who hadn't been arrested on this occasion, saying, that was great, thank you so much. The best hope for the security and freedom of the Baltic states long term is democracy in Russia. Yes. Maybe a very, very long way off. I'm not optimistic. But this is what we've got to do. And I think we've really got to reach out to the Russian Democrats, these beleaguered Russian Democrats who can't get a hearing in London, who can't get a hearing in Berlin, who can't get a hearing in Warsaw, who find it difficult to get a hearing here in Washington, D.C. When they turn up, people are busy. There's scheduling problems. The senator's really busy right now. The Deputy Assistant Secretary of State's out of town. No one really wants to hear these inconvenient people who want to quibble on the reset. We've got to say, you're welcome. Come to the Estonian House. Come and give your message. Come to JBANC. Let's really reach out to them, because if they go down, we're in trouble. If they win, we're safe. Thank you very much.
We hope to have the last speaker is Terry Schultz, who will be speaking to us by Skype. All connected? No. Okay.
You get Skype in here.
Then you get me.
Should we take a question?
No.
Why don't you speak while...
Well, we don't know how, if they can get it, they can get it. If they can't, I'll start as soon as we know. It's not connected? It doesn't look like it. Okay. All right. You're victimized. You don't get...
Nope, there she is.
There she is. She's here. You're not victimized. Okay. Better.
Do we have the tech person here to get the video?
Terry, can you start speaking anyway?
We're just going to call her in right now.
Because we all know Skype's an Estonian invention.
Yes, it goes through Chelyabinsk. It's slow.
But listening to Edward was just great. He gave us a lot of good ideas and new things we can do. So if we're feeling tired and in need of inspiration, I think that was a very good talk. It reminded me of that wonderful demonstration that we had when they were shooting the Chinese students. A lot of you, I think, joined us there by the Chinese embassy, and realizing that if one totalitarian regime can just shoot innocent unarmed students, then the next one is going to see that they can do that too. We even had special signs when the Soviet embassy cars would go by and say, Gorbachev, talk to your buddy in Beijing, tell him to call the dogs off, you know. So it's all interrelated, and we have to seize every opportunity.
We're going to have to give up.
Oh,
So,
give
which
up.
she can really regret, because I'm going to speak. Okay, I'm going to make 3 quick points. When I teach diplomatic history at the University of Tartu in Estonia, I suggest that in the 20th century, the first question you have to ask about American foreign policy is the year divisible by 2 or is it divisible by 4? If it's divisible by 2, that means they're congressional elections, and if it's divisible by 4, that means they're presidential elections. The United States would not have ever recognized the Baltic countries in 1922 had it that year not been divisible by 2, and Senator Henry Cabot Lodge of Massachusetts needed the votes of the Lithuanian community of Western Massachusetts. Otherwise, when the President of the United States was asked by the good senator to recognize Lithuania, he said, "What's a Lithuania?" And then he asked the Secretary of State, "Why don't we recognize them?" To which point the Secretary of State responded, "I don't know why." And the President said, "Well, Henry Cabot Lodge needs you to recognize them." And hence, it is because of Baltic Americans that things have happened and that the countries of the Baltic countries were recognized by the United States. It is also true that had 1940 not been a year divisible by 4 and a presidential election where Franklin Roosevelt was running for a 3rd term, and the Lithuanian American community again made it very clear that their votes would come to him only if he supported the views of Loy Henderson, the policy man at state, and adopted the non-recognition policy. Consequently, it should be a common ground that it is because of Baltic Americans that the Baltic countries have had the international support they have had. It is also should be common ground that that should be in the future. But I'd like to make 3 points about the 3 very different audiences that the Baltic states have and Baltic American activists should have. The first, of course, is for the neighbors. It would be nice if Russia would become a democracy. Whenever anyone talks about that prospect, I think of the old joke, which many of you may know, that there are 2 solutions to the Polish problem. There is the realistic one, and there is the miraculous one. In the realistic one, Jesus Christ and the 12 apostles come down from heaven and put things right. In the miraculous one, the Poles do it themselves. That's sort of what I think is possible for Russia becoming a democracy before the second coming. The fact is that promoting democracy, however, is another matter, and promoting the rights of the minorities in the current borders of the Russian Federation is a necessity. Second, the Baltic diasporas have got to continue to reach out not only to ordinary Americans, but to other diasporas far more effectively than they have in the past. My great dream is to see all of the captive nations, and there are still a lot of them, marching together under a common roof, under a common organization, and to see JBANC itself expand organizationally to include other Baltic organizations in its ranks in the future. The third is to the United States. It is all too easy here to have proclaimed victory if you are an ordinary American and you think there are things called Balts. There are no Balts outside of Limburg an der Lahn in Germany. There are Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians, and people here need to be reminded of that. Yes, 1 million people, 1 million Baltic Americans gets you a seat at the table, but it's only because you can reach out to larger communities that you have a chance. Now, in saying all this, I think one thing Baltic Americans need to recognize, and it's something that Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians often do not recognize about their own countries. One of the reasons that Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have been so successful is they have had the possibility of restoring something, not simply building or reforming something. It is because there was a constitution to go back to in each country. It was because there was a historical memory to go back to that Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania could proceed. It is also the case that all 3 of the Baltic countries were able to build new institutions, new armies, rather than absorb Soviet institutions and rename them. We tend to forget that those were preconditions of success. And consequently, when one is looking at the neighbors, one is in a very different situation. Because of the former Soviet republics, only 2 others were a restoration of the status quo ante, and neither of them was prepared to act on that basis. The Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians, and Baltic Americans need to do more to promote that. And finally, it is important, another division, which if I were giving a lecture on or teaching at an American university, I would insist is a number you need to remember in thinking about Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian history, and that is 20. It is, as we meet here, 20 years since Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania recovered de facto independence. They had been de jure independence since the 20s. But it is worth remembering that it was 20 years between the emergence of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in the wake of the collapse of the Russian Empire and the reoccupation of those countries as a result of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It was 20 years. It was one generation. If there is one thing that we as friends of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania should never forget, it is that 20 years is a long time, and 20 years is the blink of an eye, historically. The fact is, there are no final ends here. It is a permanent struggle. And it is important to remember that we have to not only recruit new generations, but recruit new people to keep what may be a very, very bad future in the Russian Federation. President Ilves shared with me by email something he may have shared with many of you as well a week ago about the latest joke that comes out of the Russian capital of Moscow. The story has it in Moscow that they are now forming two political parties among Russians. There will be the Putinites and there will be the Medvedevites. And President Dmitry Medvedev is currently trying to decide which one to join. We're not talking about an effective democracy in any serious way. I would like, however, to end my remarks, and then we will have time for a few questions. To end my remarks, I got my 2 minutes. Thank you. One more thing. In February of 1991, when I was working for the Department of State, I was asked by the Lithuanian American community to go up and speak to the Lithuanian church in Baltimore. Many of you have been there, I suspect. There were about 600 people in that church, and I was a U.S. government official, someone who has been observed, was always obedient to letter, but not the spirit of the rules. So I had to find a way to encourage people to think that independence was going to be recovered very soon, whatever they were hearing from the people who were going to utter the words of the Kiev speech only a few months later. And so I looked out at the crowd of 600 people, 600 Lithuanians ranging in age from the youngest was 2 weeks, the oldest was 102, I was told. I don't think she was listening, but never mind. And I said as my way of indicating how impressed I was with that age range and how much that mattered in terms of American politics and the influence on the government of the United States, that it was truly impressive, all the people who were in that church on that day, but we could only regret that there was one person who was not there. And that person, of course, was Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev. Because had Mr. Gorbachev been in that audience and seen that people who were 4 generations removed from their homeland and were still learning the language and were still passionately committed to the independent survival and prosperity of Lithuania and her neighbors, that he would recognize that there are not enough guns in the Soviet army to prevent that people and peoples like that from achieving their independence and keeping it. But it is something that is not given forever. It is something that is a permanent struggle, and it is something that we should call every new generation to take part in. Thank you. We have time for 4 or 5 questions. Please identify yourself and direct your question to the member of the panel. Please.
Yes, Mara Barsic, I'm a member of the NOSO 2014 committee. When Moscow was having its Olympics, some of the is this on? Okay. Some of the games were held in Estonia, and I was wondering, was JBANC and the Estonian diaspora involved at all at sort of lobbying some of these countries that were planning to boycott these Olympics? What was the sentiment at that time, and what did those particular games do for the recognition of Estonia as this captive nation at that time? And the question's open to the panel.
Well, let me just answer. You need to remember that the 1980 Olympics, which was the Moscow Olympics, was boycotted by the United States because of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So there was a fundamentally different situation. It was not that the United States was participating and any ethnic organization would be dissenting from that, but rather that the United States and most of its Western partners was refusing to take part in the Olympic Games convened by an aggressor state. The parallel, therefore, with whether I don't believe the Sochi Games will happen, but the parallel with Sochi tends to break down because you don't have an American desire to go ahead. I've just been handed a note that Terry is on Facebook, and she's speaking or not speaking, Carl?
She's not yet, but she wanted to leave that message.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
She was, that was Terry. She said she's in Brussels, and she was the, is that working?
Yeah.
She was the only one in the Baltics in 1991. So she's following the discussion right now.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Another question?
Well, could I just
Okay,
add?
please. Then we have another one. Okay, but please go ahead, Marianne.
I was just going to add to that question about the Olympics. That was a big event. But there was even some dissent among the Baltic Americans as to whether we should be working to have the U.S. boycott the Olympics because, oh, we're going to upset all the sports fans. There's a horrible, horrible thinking in the world that sports is not political. And people will repeat this ridiculous assumption and assume that you can't ever be involved in doing anything with sports that has anything to do with politics, and it's not true, of course. But we had a lot of very, very good activities that were aimed at the U.S. non-participation, and we were successful. This was one of our really biggest efforts, and it was led by people in California. Tony Mazeka was one of the big organizers, but I'm sure there were others here that were part of it too. So.
Next, please.
I'm going to try to weave together several disparate themes that the speakers touched on into one question. And it starts off with Mel's comment that he was so inspired and enthusiastic at the beginning of his involvement in the Baltic community that he wished he could work at it full time. And I know exactly how he feels because I felt that very much the same way. We have so many talented people who would love to dedicate themselves to doing nothing but Baltic American activities 24/7, 365. And by the way, we're living in a world that demands that because the game has been upped. There's no waiting for a week for a news cycle. As Ed Lucas mentioned, there's new weapons, there's new technology, but that new technology also means that we have to be vigilant 24/7, 365. And I don't know, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I don't know if there's enough strictly volunteer people to do that. The other thing is that a lot of these projects, like Ed Lucas mentioned, the Singing Revolution, which I've been involved in for 6 years, working more or less full time on it, the fruit of the labor is that starting in September, it's going to be distributed as curriculum material to 3,000 United States schools. So for the very first time ever, Estonian history will be taught with a curriculum guide prepared by educators in the US. Now, to many people, if you had said that 10 years ago, they would have said, you're dreaming, you're nuts. So my question is, I'm a little concerned about sustaining activism over the long run. I mean, look at Carl, who puts this, he's the glue that holds JBANC together, but his is a paid position, not a volunteer position. There are many wonderful, fantastic volunteers. Does the panel think it might be a good idea to put funds and resources towards recruiting and retaining some particularly talented Balts so that we could have key people in strategic positions to be assured to combat all of these themes that we have been talking about?
To be honest, I think my short answer is no. And I think that the great thing about volunteer work is it sucks people in. And one of the effects of the internet and new technology is to make the productivity of volunteers much greater. You can do things for nothing. You can run a website for nothing. You can run a Facebook page for nothing. You can tweet for nothing. So I think that I also feel that in the end, the Baltic states have embassies all over the world, and that we should probably be encouraging them to work more closely together on these issues. And it slightly concerns me sometimes in some of the cities I go to that I see sometimes quite large Baltic embassies, which seem to be duplicating each other's functions a bit. And I wonder if there's room for a bit of rationalization on, say, the cultural, not the cultural, on the consular side. And there are some very good examples of where this happens. But I think that, given the Baltic states are no longer economic basket cases, they are they're multi-billion-dollar economies with multi-billion-dollar government budgets and big foreign services, that we need to add. I think we need to add the spice as volunteers rather than trying to go out and buy the ingredients ourselves. I think I don't really. And also, if you start trying to do everything with paid staff, where do you stop? I can always argue the need for more paid staff. That's why government bureaucracies get bigger and bigger. And I think employing people is quite. And we was mentioned earlier, I think today on the Baltic defence budgets, that we tend to spend too much money on people. Employing people is pretty expensive. And given that there is, the great resource of the diaspora is people and goodwill, we should, for the most part, be using volunteer time, I think, rather than trying to spend all the time raising money in order to pay people to do as a job stuff that you might be able to get people to do as volunteer anyway.
Yes. Can I just add something real quick? I just wanted. Is it working? Let me just clarify one thing I was saying. I think what I was saying earlier about the working, trying to make a living off of this is more in jest because, again, at the time I was a sophomore in college and you're trying to figure out what to do with your life. Honestly, I believe that volunteering for JBANC or for any type of these communities means a lot more because it comes from the heart, not from your pocketbook. And in a way, you're not seen as a mercenary, you're not seen as someone who basically could be bought, could be tempted away with a better offer. We do this because we love these countries. And I think that's the most important thing about volunteering. Anything you do, you volunteer yourself, you give a piece of your heart. And I think that's the most important thing that makes us as separate communities together as JBANC that much more effective.
Thank you. I think we'll end with that. I'd like to thank all the panelists and thank all of you. We'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back to the fourth panel.
Well, it's
Somebody else that was going to speak somewhere else, I don't remember where, and again, they couldn't get the motion, they dropped it. Oh, it was maybe, yeah. And so they ended up just doing a landline thing, and then the landline thing didn't work either.
We had that happen in August in Board's episode.
Yeah, also.
He just did.
Terry just arrived. I hear his Skype sound. Sorry, Terry.
The program crashed.
Oh, no. Sorry, Terry. I mean, that's the funny thing. She was the only one during 91. I mean, CNN's got, we should get some of those clips out of CNR. More out of CNR.
all you have to do. See this right here? Just take it out because it's already used.
Okay.
Take it out, put it in. If you want to screw one in to keep it tight, you can do that. If not, you can just put it in.
And I'll hit the text screen and it should be
Pretty much all you. What is it? Function F7. Hold function F7 and it'll actually pop up on the screen.
Okay, no worries.
I'll be around just as soon as long as
If she's on, she is online. Yeah. Now? No, she's online. She's right there. How did that happen?
Hi, I'm Ingrid.
I restarted it and
Okay,
it
we're gonna
brought
have
up
you
error
first?
messages.
Okay,
Now I restarted it.
wonderful.
Now the phone is.
And we're gonna have a 5-minute, and I'm gonna have my 2-minute warning, and we're
Check
gonna, you know,
her and say that,
about, yeah.
that's really, yeah, listen, thanks for, sorry, all the, hanging in there, because.
We've got 8 minutes, we got 8 people to get through.
Did you want to try her or
Yeah, but we're gonna, I'd like to ask Terry Schultz to try again.
Okay.
Okay, maybe just at the very beginning then? Oh, well, yes.
Okay, you let her know.
Hi,
It's up to you.
Ingrid.
All right. When is we're gonna do
Test
call
1 2
back?
1 2. Check check.
It doesn't matter to me. I can,
Okay. Yeah, I think we're back to normal. I had too much things on the computer, so it just sort of messed up.
very well. Okay, so they're up now. So all we have to do is press video.
I always get mine.
Find out. I'm gonna go.
Do you need to talk to this? Yeah. Go ahead.
I've got my USB plug in. And you do have PowerPoint, right?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
PowerPoint. Yeah, we did a PowerPoint earlier.
Yeah.
We're going to switch Paul and Paulus and Paul. Well, I mean, you're going to fall off the side, I think. So, well,
Did you have a PowerPoint? Okay, I'm just starting up PowerPoint.
If you can find another chair and
PPT or
fix.
PPTX, and it's fine.
Oh, we have
It's
some
an older
older
version.
chairs?
We had a problem earlier that it wasn't PPT.
Can we test it out?
Yep.
Oh.
Just
Oh, yeah, then it's all right. I'm sorry. I thought we
grab
were
the
short.
file and try and open it up. If not, I've got my Mac back there with the latest version, so I can.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I actually came to JBANC intern
Okay. Hi, Terry.
Hey,
Wait a minute. Hi. Let me get you on Facebook, okay?
is that on
Just-
Facebook?
Just a second. Boy. No, not quite yet. guy who knows this stuff is he's coming up in just a second, so this is just a little bit. There's just a bunch of stuff going on at once, but it's just so exciting to see what's going on. Really great that it's made it.
I'm glad I
Notre
did
Dame's
it.
a great campus too.
Oh, yeah. Tremendous.
But they later gave us the gold status. Because of this political
She's taking pictures. I bring cameras. Huh? That's okay.
The American flag and the motto. Oh, that's over there.
She's just out having a cigarette.
Oh, good.
You know Natalie, of course.
I've met Natalie. Hi, Ingrid, Lucis. Nice to meet you.
Latvian American lobbyist. All right.
Yeah.
There you go. That looks good. You can take out my red eye and my 5 o'clock shadow
And if you could Photoshop me to make me about 20 pounds thinner, that would be great. Are we ready to start? Where'd Carl go? Carl, are we ready to start? 5 minutes?
Oh, good. Okay.
It's Donna, right? No,
Donna, yeah.
Donna, okay. Hi, I'm Ingrid.
Did you get the flag?
Nice to meet you.
You're doing the
moderating.
Okay.
I said I've got the hard task of getting all of you done in an hour. So we go to cocktails, you know? We're standing between them and cocktails, so we're good. It'll be good. Excuse me. This is the fun part. The activism is
I think so too. Yeah. I mean, everything else is fascinating.
But you know, I was in JBANC. I was in JBANC. I organized some of the protests, participated in the bullhorns, and ended up. That's my life. I mean, it's not for work for JBANC, but my day job is being an activist for other organizations. So there are ways to make money, just not in Baltic stuff.
Tell me about it.
Where do you live?
I live in New Jersey.
Okay. You just came down for this. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for doing this.
It's well worth it.
It was a very good conference. I missed yesterday, so I didn't get to hear any of that. But I think that today
Came
was...
down for yesterday.
Yes.
And it's just a great opportunity for Carl to bring all these people together, having a chance, making all these connections.
It's fabulous. It's great.
It helps everyone out.
It does, and it's not we're all in this together. We really are.
Yeah.
And you guys are, I've read all the stuff. With what group are you?
We're with the Circadian
That's right.
Cultural Institute and No Soup to
Right? Is that how you said?
No. Yeah.
You are. Okay. I'm just trying to, I don't want to butcher anything.
It's okay, I understand. I just want to make sure my presentation is going to be okay.
Yeah. Were you like Carl's kids?
Or I might, that was his kid? The cute kid, that was
one
the
of
cute,
them's
yeah.
their daughter. I'm like, okay.
At least they're good looking kids.
Well, I was like, thank goodness, we've all got those pictures on our Facebooks with the beer mugs or the wine glasses or something.
Yeah,
and I'm just
I
like,
know.
I'm like, I was leaning over to somebody going, thank God, it's not one of those pictures.
I know.
This person took the president's speech from one.
Yeah, I found that very cute. That's all right. There's always those little.
Oh, no, you got it. It is what it is, and you just have to kind of laugh about it. So, we're waiting about 9 minutes? I really need to start. Seriously, I'm sitting between vaults and cocktails. This is not a good thing. Now we're getting straight into it.
We have a power.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
Let's
I don't know what that is.
I think we're in for this later.
I don't want it to be.
I know you're waiting for your team.
It's read only things.
That's a good one.
Note name being modified by
I guess that's how it reads my flash.
Let's make sure all your slides in here.
Yeah.
Right now we're 49?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've heard of that.
Can we get the sleeping guy to get the computer up on the screen? Get the computer up on the screen. So,
All right. Can we go ahead and start? Okay. Well, I'm just going to start taking pictures.
no, hold on. You know that it works now. So it's because I think we're Skyping first. I've got it wide.
Those notes are readable.
Thanks. What's that?
It's so bad that it's the F7.
Yeah, function F7. The double screen, just cause. Unless it's on something else.
You're getting something else. Probably because you're in this program or something.
Oh,
Just minimize that.
let me check
Okay, that's it.
All right.
Great. So we'll just when the slideshow begins, do the slideshow and I can start.
Okay. So how do we? Are we going to keep it up during the other speaker?
No, because they're going to come in on Skype. So we'll just keep the sound in the background.
Okay.
If that's okay with you.
I don't
And when
mind.
you're ready to go, just go to slideshow. Start. Okay.
What?
Got your ideas down?
That's loud.
Okay.
Control switch right here. You can
Do you want to try?
I'm not sure about laptop. Computers tell me normally what PCs you just shut it. Yeah. Right.
I would have shut up, but since she didn't, I had to react.
That was a great speech.
I love this.
Do you want to introduce Terry? So she'll have to, she can only hear through this microphone, okay?
Yes, and I remember.
Do you want to run it? Or no? Okay.
Yeah, and
Oh, now Bob's off. Now Bob is off.
yes, that was a great speech.
Oh, you look scared like that TV.
Is she going to talk on this topic or just on her topic? Okay, that's it.
Remind me not to mess with
Anyone? Okay. All right. Let me just get everybody back. Excuse me, if I could have everybody take their seats, please. We're about ready to start.
That's good.
And actually, we have Terry Schultz with us. We were able to connect, and so we are going to ask her to just say a few words on where she was in 1991 and to be able to participate in our conference. Terry?
Yes, sir. I don't know who's here. They put their thing down.
Terry, are you there? Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
I can. Oh no, there's another call. Okay. Can you hear me?
You hear us?
I can. Oh
There
no,
you are.
there's another call. Okay.
Everybody's over there.
There's
You
an-
can't see them.
No. The echo is really, really bad, like 30 seconds.
Okay, you sound crystal clear here, so anytime you're ready. Oh.
Really, really bad, like. Okay, I'm gonna turn down. Hold on.
You sound crystal clear here. So
Okay, I'm turning down my live stream. Hold on. I've been watching you guys. Okay, I'm gonna turn down. Okay, ready?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. I don't want to hijack the next panel, and I'm not going to take much time because I don't qualify as an activist. I definitely wouldn't call myself an activist because as a journalist, I like the word in Estonian, ajan kirjanik, a time writer, and that's what I was in the Baltics. And I was there quite a bit from 1990 through 1997. And I was lucky enough, as a journalist would say, to be in the Baltics during the coup of Gorbachev. And that was probably the most seminal moment for me when I was there because, as I guess you have my bio, I was there with the Estonian journalists in the building when we didn't know what the tanks were going to do, having seen what they had done in Latvia, having seen what had happened in Lithuania previously, and Estonia had no idea if it was going to be the next one. To have some deaths from the TV among the journalist community. So we sat in there, we waited. They let me have the international phone line, the only one that was left in the entire building. Because they felt that by me talking to CNN live that night, they were safer. And that was very kind. My mother knew I was okay then. Well, okay, but she knew I was alive. It really bonded me with Estonia because I wouldn't have left them for anything. And I'm still friends with those people. Karen Kierdo Massa is now, I guess, a pretty well-known interpreter, translator in the Baltics. She was a teenager then, and she was translating everything for me. And Hagi Shane, I guess, is an instructor now. He was the head of the TV service at the time, and he was the one who actually let me in the door downstairs. When I came knocking on the door as the tanks were outside and said, I work for CNN, I was a freelancer, but I said, I played that up and they let me in, and I was the only one in there besides the Estonian. So that was really something that sort of made us blood brothers forever. And I was also in Helsinki, as you know, it was sort of the remote capital during occupation, and I got to know Tom Ilves when he was a journalist, and Rina Kionka, and Sven Jurgensen, and Yuri Luik, and all of these guys were just rebels back then. Now they're running the country, of course. It was really a special time, and I feel really lucky, really, really privileged to have been there and to have seen these things live and have known these people when they were risking their lives for everything. It was not really dangerous for me. I never felt that much in danger. Thank goodness. I'm not really a thrill seeker in that way. But again, quite a privilege to have seen Estonia's independence from the inside. I then later got my master's at University of Helsinki and wrote my thesis on contradictions and hypocrisy in U.S. foreign policy toward the Baltics during the occupation. And one of the professors in Helsinki, it just shows how sheltered things are back there sometimes. He said, do you think you can ever work again in Washington after writing this? As if anybody would read a thesis written in Helsinki on the Baltics. It was kind of charming. Now I live in Brussels. I cover the EU and NATO, and I would honestly say that here the Baltics punch a bit above their weight. They've got very visible commissioners. NATO pays a lot of attention to Estonia in particular, and I'm proud to see them doing well. And Again, not an activist, but I can tell you that whenever I can slip a Baltic mention in a story, I definitely do it. And I'm going to pass it on to the rest of the panel now. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take them later.
Thank you, Terry.
Okay, we'll disconnect for the time being. Is that okay? And we'll give you a call back during the question period?
Oh, sure you will.
Bye, Terry. Thanks.
Bye, Terry. Okay, well, we are on to our last panel of the day, which is Lessons Learned, Democracy, Promotion, and Current Activism Campaigns. And this is something that I'm really excited and happy to be moderating. I do promise to try to keep our speakers concise, and because I really don't want to keep the bolts from the reception that's coming after this. But I do have a daunting task of 8 speakers who have a lot to say, and so we'll try to manage our time appropriately. My name is Ingrid Lucis, and I am a former JBANC intern, and I was a JBANC board director many years ago, and have just come back onto the board, and kind of sitting today thinking and reminiscing about activism and its importance, and remembering the days of 1991, even in my head, and even before that, when I myself was behind the bullhorn, standing with a lot of people, locked arms in front of the Soviet embassy, even laying on the ground in front of the Soviet embassy one time with my fellow friends from Estonia and Lithuania in protest of the occupation of the Baltic states. So somebody who's been a long-time activist, I'm excited to hear other activists that we have on the panel, and really urge everybody out there, young and old, to continue your activism. My experience with JBANC actually led me to a career in activism. So they're maybe not with the Baltics, but with other areas, but it is something that's fun and exciting. And we are going to ask each of the panelists just to say a short word about themselves. You got your bios, and that you do have their bios, and that way we can save some time. And I am going to ask Paul Goebel to come first.
Having tried your patience before, I will not say any more about myself, other than that the closest I come to being a Balt is that that was Chelyabinsk.
That was his 2-minute. No.
Okay. As my ancestors come from Schleswig-Holstein, which is at the other end of the Baltic Sea, and left there in 1491. I apologize in advance. The reason I'm speaking first in this is that I'm going to be leaving after my remarks because of the fire in our house. I have to drive 2.5 hours to our weekend place, which is becoming our residence. No one can live in our house and won't be able to for 6 or 8 months until it's rebuilt. All of you know that in order to become a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst, you have to undergo psychoanalysis yourself. For many years, I have been teaching ethnicity as an academic subject, and one of the arguments that I make is that you cannot talk about anyone else's ethnicity or national culture until you understand your own. And I believe that you can reduce what American culture and American identity is about to 3 ideas. The first is a profound belief among Americans that we don't have a national culture, we're rational. This, of course, leads us to assume that if we repeat anything loudly enough and long enough, everyone will have to accept it because we are rational. Second, Americans believe that history is irrelevant. You can always change your name, move to the suburbs or Southern California and start over. Because history is irrelevant, so is geography. Americans are, as you probably know, the most geographically ignorant people on earth. We are prisoners of the Mercator projection, the map for the world that's locked in most officials' heads in Washington, which shows the United States in the middle of the world as God intended, protected by 2 large blue bodies of water and a large number of vowel and consonant challenge countries on the edge ready to fall off. And the third element of American culture, which has both good and bad consequences, as Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians have reason to know,
Americans believe that all problems have solutions, and problems without solutions are not problems. That, on the one hand, means we get involved in things we shouldn't because there is no obvious solution. On the other hand, it means we get involved in things that there is no obvious solution and something works out. Had it not been that part of American culture, support for Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania would not have been forthcoming. The problem is, of course, that in our time, we have become increasingly short-term, and the corollary to the third of those propositions is that Americans believe that all solutions are available before the third commercial. And if they're not, we get bored and we want an exit strategy. Can you imagine the discussion of non-recognition policy now, given the kind of short-term approach to international affairs that informs American thinking? Well, Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians on the one hand, and Baltic Americans on the other, know that all three elements of those American self-conceptions about their culture are wrong. Americans are not especially rational compared to other peoples. We are driven just as much by our own demons as anyone else. Second, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania know that history is not irrelevant. History matters profoundly, and that means how you evaluate history will determine the future. The reason we fight over the past is because we are fighting over the future. And those people who declare that they've lost already historically have lost not just the past, but any chance for the future. And third, we know that for Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, there are no obvious solutions to their existential problem. They are three small countries who live in a bad neighborhood. As Leonard Mary liked to say, I'd rather have Canada for a neighbor. Indeed. But there is no possibility, even though the island of Hiiumaa is moving 2.5 centimeters a decade west, that it's going to get to Newfoundland in our time. The issue, of course, is that this set of attitudes in the United States is making the existential problem of the Baltic countries over the next 20 years far worse, because we have proclaimed victory. We have proclaimed victory over what has happened in the Baltic countries more than the Baltic peoples have. Because Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians know that the situation there is not forever. The last time they were independent for 20 years, let's remember, the Lithuanians played a huge role in international affairs in the League of Nations in the 1930s, a role so large that many people, including your humble servant, felt it necessary to warn Professor Landsbergis was not going to be available to them in the post-1991 world. So just the fact that you're doing well now doesn't tell you you're going to be doing well in 10 years. The assumption that history is over is nonsense. This is a bad neighborhood, and it's going to get worse in the near term. And there are three reasons for that. The first is that the chief sponsor of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, with all of the failures, and I must say, hearing her talk about her master's thesis on American hypocrisy in the Baltic states, I wanted to say that just if the book on 500 Years of German Humor is the shortest book ever written, a master's thesis on American hypocrisy on the Baltic states would clearly have to be the longest. The fact is the United States is turning away, and it's turning away in three ways. First, the United States no longer has 50% of the world's GDP the way it did in 1945. It has 22%. Our ability to affect the rest of the world is smaller than it used to be, and will be smaller yet. By 2020, we will be down to 12% of the world's GDP, and what you can do with 12% of the world's GDP as opposed to 50 is a fundamentally different thing. Second, the United States is increasingly focused on another part of the world and another method of dealing with things. I had an occasion to speak to some Air Force officers the other day, and I said their greatest crime in recent days was getting the President of the United States to use the word kinetic. That's the latest hypocritical word for military force. When you aren't, I used to tell the leaders of the Baltic countries when I was there in the 90s that the difference between being an Estonian and being an American was this. In Estonia, if you make a mistake, Estonia suffers. If you're an American and you make a mistake, Estonia suffers. Now the problem is we've lost our margin for error. When we make a mistake, we suffer. And that is going to change the way the United States deals with the world in fundamental ways, and Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are going to suffer along with us. The second thing is that all three Baltic countries have serious problems domestically. They're not the problems people were worried about 20 years ago. The problem that I worry the most about is what I call the revenge of the middle-aged. The Baltic revolutions in 1991 were led by the oldest and youngest, those who could remember before 1940 and those who had not been so powerfully affected by the Soviet dictatorship of occupation. Now the oldest people have left politics and in many cases left this life, and the youngest people being bored with politics have left, and the people who have come in their place are the middle-aged, and the middle-aged who were the most affected by the Soviet experience. That is a frightening thing, and it is not something that I see anyone really addressing. There are economic problems, and just being in the EU or the Eurozone is not enough, although congratulations to the Estonians for getting their map right on the back of the euro. All right? Third, the United States, because it has so many fewer resources, isn't going to be focused everywhere. We are no longer going to ever have a president who is going to repeat what John F. Kennedy said in 1961 about going anywhere and paying any price. We're only going to go to a few places, and Fox News and the Wall Street Journal are going to question doing even that. That's a reality that you have to live with. There is also the problem that there is no, I'm going to get there, okay? There's also the third big problem, to go very quickly, is the Russian Federation. Russia is headed toward a fascist regime and toward disintegration. And the process of the rise of Russian fascism and the disintegration of the Russian Federation will affect the Baltic countries. Tragically, the Baltic problem has not been defined in Washington as defending against that, because we're too busy calling the Russians our strategic partners. And some Baltic Americans have got to address that along with the Baltic governments and Baltic peoples. Now, I want to end by telling you just one story. Actually, story and a half. The half story is this. In digging things out of the fire, I did rescue one thing. The consumed bottle of Great Western champagne, which was the only bottle of champagne drunk at the Department of State on the occasion of the restoration of recognition of de facto governments in the Baltic states. That I saved, even though it smells of chemical smoke. But it was on that day, 20 years ago, on September 2nd, 1991, after President George Herbert Walker Bush made the announcement about the restoration of Baltic independence at 9:45 a.m. on Labor Day to ensure the least amount of media coverage. I made 6 telephone calls, 3 to the ambassadors presumptive and 3 to the leaders of the Baltic American diaspora communities here in Washington. The most memorable conversation I had was with Mr. Ernst Jaksin, the Estonian representative in the United States, then based in New York. And I referred to Mr. Jaksin as Ambassador Jaksin for the first time. And I said I was sure that he was grateful that that day restoring Baltic independence had come true, and that he was celebrating because of it. And Mr. Jaksin said, yes, I'm celebrating, but I'm also remembering with a heavy heart all the people who worked so hard to get to this day and who are not here to see it. Let me say just this. I very much hope that in the coming months and years, when we see the ambassadors of places like Circassia, like Tatarstan, like Siberia and Tibet become countries, that we will not have to regret that so many people are missing, because the people who will have led that charge, and they will be Baltic Americans, I'm convinced, here, will still all be with us, and all of us in this room will have a chance to celebrate their freedom as well as ours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, for being with us today. Next, I'd like to call to the dais Fredo Arias King.
Should I go up there?
You can sit down wherever you want to do.
Well, first of all,
a big aite, paldies, and achulabai to the JBANC and to old friends who invited me here, Carl, Mel, and Marianne, and the new friends I've met. My talk will be about some lessons on democracy activism, but none of what I'm about to say is going to surprise the Baltics here. I'm addressing it to the Circassians and Moldovans and others who happen to be around. The first lesson. You always will have friends and foes in Washington, and it's not always clear who they may be. The second lesson, you can always change your situation in your favor, but you have to be very persistent. A lot of times people come here once or twice and then they're surprised that there was no reaction from Washington. But if you're persistent, you'll be amazed what the results can be. And the third lesson, even when you think you're not achieving anything, there's nothing nobler than democracy activism. And you never meet better people in this world than through democracy activism. And I'll close my thoughts on the Baltic transitions and their impact for the world. Well, on the first lesson, unexpected friends and foes in Washington, I learned with two cases that I handled very closely, which was the Mexico campaign. I'm from Mexico. The Mexico campaign back in 1999 and 2000, when this guy called Vicente Fox was running for president in a country that had had a one-party regime for 71 years, and he was not going to win. And the second one was with Moldova in 2003 with the whole federalization issue. Well, the PAN, the Mexico party, what they are and what Fox is it's a Christian Democratic party, pro-business, not anti-American. And so I thought it would be very easy to sell it in Washington, especially with the Republican Party, that, you assume the Republicans are more or less the same, so they'll become PAN fans and it'll be easy. And the Democrats, well, they're kind of center-left, so they'll probably favor either the existing dictatorship or the leftist party in Mexico. But surprise, the not surprise was when the Heritage Foundation and Jesse Helms and others in Congress, plus the International Republican Institute, were indeed our closest friends and unwavering supporters. The surprise was when the Bush campaign, both campaigns were going on at the same time, was quite hostile. And on April 7th of 2000, a day that will live in infamy, Bush actually endorsed the candidate of the one-party regime, the former secret police chief. His name was Francisco Labastida. When I exchanged emails and called Condoleezza Rice and Robert Zoellick, the people handling the foreign relations of the Bush campaign, the very memorable quote from Bob Zoellick was, "Sorry, Fredo, but we only play with the big boys." And Condoleezza Rice refused to do anything whatsoever to help our case. And this, by the way, had very important and not very good consequences for the Mexico-U.S. relationship later. The first baby steps of a democratic Mexico and the U.S. was on the other side of the fence. But I was trying to convince our people that it was, Bush was not representative of the United States as a whole. Albert P. Gore also did not make my task very easy because he also endorsed tacitly the secret police chief when his campaign manager's daughter was working in Mexico City full-time for him. But among the Democrats, there were also some surprises, such as the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs was always very kind to us. So the lesson in hindsight there is that those statist, big government, Bushite Republicans may not be very helpful. Actually, Bush himself, his father, and his grandfather, Prescott, all had business deals with the Mexican oligarchy, and that might have influenced their decision-making. There was an endorsement by Bush father, Herbert Walker Bush, to Carlos Salinas de Gortari, one of the worst presidents we've ever had back in 1988. And since that saved him after his electoral fraud back then he basically gave everything to Bush Sr. that he asked for, including NAFTA. So probably Bush Jr.'s calculations were, more Machiavellian, but they backfired, unfortunately. Whereas our support, most loyal and enthusiastic, came from the ideological Republicans, the Reaganites. And there were many, despite, the Bushites kind of pushing away the Reaganites. Nonetheless, there were enough in power at that time in Congress and in other places that helped us tremendously. With the Democrats, it was the opposite, more or less. Those with leftist or ideological fetishes and who don't really know what they want, and they can do a lot of damage to your cause. But we also, among the Latin American specialists in Washington, we also have our Strobe Talbots in several administrations. Those Democrats, however, who are fighters but not ideological, more salt-of-the-earth people, working class or middle-class values, labor union, ethnic types, those can be a great boon to you. And of course, in your case, a very obvious example would be Bobby Rush. But who would have thought that someone like that, right, would support the Baltic cause? Well, we also found allies among the Democrats just by coming back, 14 times in total back then. We had people like that as well. So those Indian rights or environmentalists, human rights activists, because of our opponent's record, the PRI dictatorship was very repressive, and not as repressive as the Soviet system or Gaddafi, but it was enough repressive that those Democrat types came to our side only because we had a common enemy. And then there are the cynics, of course, there will always be those here in Washington, who don't do anything for you until you win. And then suddenly you're their best friend. And of course, I'm thinking of the National Endowment for Democracy. They did nothing for us when we were, in trouble, and this Vicente Fox, who was not going to win for president, they did nothing. But then when he won, they threw a lot of money out the window, organizing a huge event for him and giving him some kind of democracy award, when that money could have been better spent, helping the Circassians, for example, or some other. It was sad that a lot of the people who helped us unwaveringly, there's this American Foreign Policy Council that helped us tremendously during the campaign, but somehow they were not as good as promoting themselves as they were democracy activism, unlike NED, which is exact opposite. So they got all the brownie points after our victory. On the Moldova example, we had similar lesson, but Moldova was more challenging, of course, because as Ed Lucas once said, Moldova is not a forgotten country because it was never remembered in the first place. And so we had to explain where Moldova was before we could actually push against this federalization issue. What happened there was, as you know, a Russian occupation of Moldova, the eastern part of Moldova. They call it Transnistria. It's a puppet regime. Only communists or former communists have ruled Moldova until recently. And it's a corrupt and poor country. It's the most corrupt and poor country in Europe. The Democratic opposition was headed by the Christian Democrats, this guy called Yuri Roshka, who was incidentally the first one. Moldova was the first entity to recognize independent Lithuania back in 1990 when Landsbergis declared independence. It's still a Soviet republic, Moldova, thanks to Yuri Roshka, who shepherded through the Supreme Soviet of Moldova this resolution to recognize it. So he was the head of the opposition, the anti-communist thing. And federalization was this project by Moscow, advocated by Primakov and Trupnikov and other KGB types, and you would think that America would be against federalization, especially because Moscow openly admitted that this was done to bifurcate Moldova and make sure it never joins NATO. But surprise, the State Department supported federalization. So our task was to build a coalition that included several people, Bruce Jackson, Jean Kirkpatrick, senators, congressmen. We brought Yuri Roshka to Washington together with others, and we defeated federalization simply because at the end of the day, it turns out that the whole thing, this Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, was headed by 4 State Department officials who were not accountable to anybody. So anyway, so this mixture of apathy, confusion, smugness, ignorance, unqualified people in key positions explains the quote from Winston Churchill, who said, "You can always count on the Americans to do the right thing, but after they've tried everything else." So what is the most important thing that JBANC can do? Clearly, the legacy of the Baltic liberation and transition has been very inspiring, very impressive. You actually caused a fistfight in the United States cabinet when my old boss, Jack Kemp, was defending Lithuania, and on the other side was Jim Baker, and they got into a fistfight. The U.S. cabinet, this is very rare, and rarely do they do that over foreign policy, so congratulations. The impact of transition, however, was also very impressive. Liberation from tyranny was followed by liberation from poverty and liberation from statism, its twin sister. So the flat tax, which has now spread to almost 30 countries, that started by Mart Laar. I asked Mart Laar, my good friend, who I brought to Mexico a couple of times, how much did his campaign cost? And he said $50,000, and most of that was in kind, like hotel owners saying, oh, you can stay here for free. So $50,000 has produced about $100 billion of extra wealth in those 30 countries that adopted the flat tax. Congratulations to Estonia. So what can Balts do right now? Obviously, stay organized, as other speakers have said. We still have a lot of Strobe Talbots in the current government and in future governments who are willing to betray you. In Europe, you'll have the Sarkozys. You have to fight against those. And I wouldn't give up on Russian democracy the way other speakers have done. You would be amazed how quickly Russia can change its attitude with somebody like Mikhail Kasyanov or Boris Nemtsov, or I won't bet on Sakharov or Starovoitova coming back, or someone like them, of course, but someone pragmatic can come and westernize Russia, I think, rather quickly. So Look what happened with Georgia when Martlar became Saakashvili's advisor, and Georgia has grown tremendously. Latin America, if Cuba adopts the Estonian model, as they say they have, the alternative elite of Cuba wants to adopt the Estonian model, and if Cuba starts growing 10% a year, as Estonia did, that could infect the rest of Latin America, because we need to wake up in Latin America, abandon statism, lower tax rates, etc. Stop whining about the United States, embrace the United States, embrace capitalism, embrace democracy. That's something that Balts have taught us, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and you can be a small nation, but with very big solutions for the world. So congratulations.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I now call up Marcus Kolga.
Good afternoon. I've just got to quickly load up my PowerPoint presentation. In the meantime, I'll just introduce myself. You may have seen my film Gulag 113, which is a documentary that I produced about 5-6 years ago about, sorry, I'm going to have to pull your stick out so we can put it back in. That I produced about 5 or 6 years ago about my grandfather who was sent to the Gulag along with 30,000 other Estonians back in 1941. And what we did was we got into a car in Tallinn and drove about 2,000 kilometers from Tallinn to the far north of Russia. Oh dear. And produced a documentary film about it. I'm also, I'm trying to open it up here. Okay, where are we? PowerPoint, there it is. Bear with me for 2 seconds here. It's loading.
You're good.
There we go. And the show is about to begin on this very slow machine. But now there's no signal.
There we go. It's on.
Okay, it's on. Great.
Sort of.
So I understand that we're really short on time, so I'm just going to give you a very, very brief overview of some of the activism that's been going on recently in Canada. First of all, let me just start by congratulating and thanking JBANC for 50 years of achievement. You've been a wonderful role model for the communities in Canada and continue to be so. Certainly some of the things that we're doing in Canada right now, we're modeling after the way that we're modeling ourselves after JBANC and some of the other community organizations that JBANC is involved in. One of those is the Central and Eastern European Council in Canada, which we formed, I would say, about 2 or 3 years ago. This is an organization of all the different community congresses of the Central and Eastern European communities in Canada, and we've created an umbrella group. Being from the Estonian community in Canada, when we tried to lobby on our own, there are only 20,000 of us, we really don't have a voice in Parliament. So the idea was to connect with all these other communities, with the large Ukrainian community, the Polish community, and create this organization. So now instead of just 20,000 Canadians, this organization, CEC, represents nearly 10% of the population, 4 million people in Canada. So now we are getting listened to. One of the first sort of tests for the CEC to see if it would work was a commemoration of the fall of the wall in 2009. We had a fairly big gathering at Toronto City Hall. We had the leaders of all the major federal political parties show up, and we actually received quite a bit of media. The Ukrainian community, the Polish community all turned out, and I think in total we had about 400 people there. So that's how we sort of kicked off our activities with the CEC. Our next step was to take Black Ribbon Day, which was a movement in the 80s, and I think you also observed Black Ribbon Day here in the States. It was on the 23rd of August, basically memorializing the victims of communism in Eastern and Central Europe, and of course the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So about a year and a half ago, I approached Bob Rae, who's one of the main political leaders in Canada, and also the former Premier of Ontario, and suggested to him that perhaps we'd like to try and introduce a motion to make Black Ribbon Day a national holiday in Canada. After about 6 months of negotiations, Black Ribbon Day was in fact made a Canadian National Day of Remembrance for the victims of communism and Nazism in Europe. And I'm just going to play you quickly the clip of this historic moment in the House of Commons. This was about a year ago. If it will play, we shall see. It certainly played in... No, it did not. Okay, well that clip is available online anyway. So I'll just quickly move ahead then. This year, to commemorate the first annual Black Ribbon Day, we organized a conference at the U of T Monk Center for International Affairs. The idea was not so much to commemorate, I mean, it was the commemoration of those victims, but we wanted to really look forward and see how we could influence policymakers. So this thing is not cooperating at all. The conference, like I said, was held at University of Toronto, and we Skyped in Boris Nemtsov from Russia. We had Robert Amsterdam, who we'll be hearing from in a second, along with Vladimir Kara-Murza, Iviano Masso, a well-known Estonian columnist, and a couple of MPs, Boris Rizhnevsky, Imbi Bayo, and Lee Edwards. It was a full-day conference, and afterwards, the entire hall was full, and the Monk Center said that it was likely the most successful conference that they'd held the entire year. Our next activity was actually just this past Thursday. We had connected through the Canadian Jewish Congress with some of the Russian diaspora who were concerned about what's going on in Russia. And the CEC supported Ivan Yushin here, who's a Russian activist, and in solidarity with the activists in Moscow who protest on the 31st of every month with 31 days, we held a protest out in front of the Toronto Russian consulate. We had about 70 people turn out, and we also received some media for that. The interesting thing is that the Central and Eastern European communities, for the first time, got together with the Russian diaspora, a fairly historic moment. Now, one question has come up throughout the day, and that's Russian propaganda and how to counter that. There's so many, just the technology is available right now, and we could use that certainly, whether it's on the web or elsewhere, to bring up our issues. And certainly right now, I don't think we're getting our message across. The Estonian state media has just recently published a wonderful English language page where there's original English language content, some translated content. But we need to do more. And just recently, about 2 weeks ago, I set up, along with Ivi Masso, who's, again, a well-known Estonian columnist, Jürgen Lindblad, who's a former member of Swedish Parliament, and Peter Rose, who is a Director of Sales and Marketing for Tallink. We set up the Nordic Media Foundation with the objective of eventually, in the next year or so, publishing electronic media with original English language content about Baltic issues. Now, I don't think that North Americans are specifically interested in Baltic issues. They will not seek out an Estonian news story. So the idea is to create a media that speaks to issues that North Americans, Westerners might be interested in, and to put our news in between there. For example, Swedish cinema, having reviews of that, interviews with interesting cultural people, and put Baltic, Latvian, and Lithuanian news in between that. And if this is going to cooperate, I can quickly give you an idea of what this media would look like. The other point about this is using the technology that we have out there. We all have iPhones and mobile apps, and this isn't going to take me to where I want to go anyway. And the idea would be to create some sort of an application specifically for iPads. This is the future of publishing, where we're specifically talking about our issues and get it out there right now because somebody else will do it. Russia Today is incredibly active. We don't get it in Canada, so when I come here, I watch it out of some sort of weird, morbid curiosity. And it always, it's just enraging to see some of the stuff that they're publishing there, both on the web and on television. Of course, we can't compete with that, but we need to use what resources we have and do something. And that's the new way of publishing, and that's tablets, telephones, and such. And again, if you want more information on that, you can actually look at some of the draft layouts and some of the content that might be available there at upnorth.eu. So that's essentially, that's my quick overview. Thanks so much again. And I guess we're going to call Bob Amsterdam?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we're going to call Bob Amsterdam now, who is in London, assuming that he is online. And he is not online. Let's
Try to get him on it. Carl, do you have his phone number? Do you have Robert Amsterdam's contact?
You know what, I'll get it. It's on my laptop, so.
You know what,
let's
how about
move
I
on.
give him 10 minutes and we'll let Terry
Yep.
know. Okay. Great, we'll call up Terry Morrison.
I'm Jim Morrison. I am retired from the Department of Defense, the Office of the Secretary of Defense. I retired in 1995. I moved to a lake down near Bedford, Virginia, in southwest Virginia. I wrote a history of the Bedford County in World War II, and I got involved in the National D-Day Memorial down there, and I was an active volunteer supporter and a tour guide there for quite a while. 10 months ago, about 200 miles south of here, a bust of Joseph Stalin was erected on a pedestal. To my knowledge, this is the only bust or statue of Stalin ever erected in America. I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about how that happened, what some of us have done to oppose this bust, and what might be done in the future. And I would also like to take the opportunity to thank JBANC for their support in this opposition to the Stalin bust. The Stalin bust was installed on June 1st at the National D-Day Memorial in the small city of Bedford, Virginia. Prior to this event, the National D-Day Memorial had been an inspiring, wonderfully conceived and designed memorial dedicated to its stated purpose of honoring the valor, fidelity, and sacrifice of Allied forces on D-Day, 6 June 1944. Those forces associated with the first day of the Normandy invasion operation. This memorial came about through the efforts of a D-Day veteran, a sergeant, and the people of Bedford, when they couldn't find a site for it, the people of Bedford stepped forward to give help in getting the site. And so they found this beautiful site on a hill in Bedford. D-Day was very important to this community of Bedford because the Bedford community lost 20 men on D-Day. We think the largest loss on D-Day per capita of any community in America. The memorial has honored Allied D-Day forces through statuary, plaques, and flags for 12 countries that contributed forces on D-Day. The Soviet Union, I might add, was not one of these 12. In 2007, the Memorial Foundation went off on a tangent beyond the purpose of honoring Allied D-Day forces. They pursued a plan to erect busts of World War II political leaders. Roosevelt, Churchill, Truman, and Attlee. Truman and Attlee didn't even come to power until a year after D-Day. Chiang Kai-shek, and Stalin, purportedly to provide World War II context for the memorial. 5 of us members of the American Legion post in Bedford met with the foundation president, who was a retired U.S. Army colonel, whose idea this was, and we tried to convince him to drop the plans for the Stalin bust. We suggested as an alternative they could put up a plaque that addressed the role of the Soviet Union and Soviet forces in World War II, particularly as they related to D-Day. We heard nothing from the president until August 2009. We read in the newspaper that the bust of Joseph Stalin had been sculpted and was being finalized. We began writing the foundation board, the president, and also elected political leaders, and then writing commentaries and letters for newspapers, all opposing the bust. On June 1st of last year, the then president of the foundation, before retiring, ordered the Stalin bust, along with the bust of Chiang Kai-shek, Attlee, and as well as Charles de Gaulle, which was added, to be erected at the memorial to accompany earlier busts of Churchill, Roosevelt, and Truman. It was about that time that Carl Altaw called me and JBANC got involved, and I really want to support that opposition that they've helped us with. Mary Ann's daughter and granddaughters came down. We had a retired New York City policeman, police captain, who was a member of the American Legion, who had volunteered up at the memorial giving tours once a week for 6 years. He helped. We had this demonstration. We had placards. One of these is over here. And he went up 4 days after the demonstration. And he gave a tour, and he was called into the office, and they said, "Is that you?" in the newspaper, and he said yes, and they said, "You're fired." He was a Korean War veteran. Carl was instrumental in helping to publicize the issue, getting an online petition started against the bust, and in having letters and statements by individuals and organizations sent to the foundation and to the media. In our opposition, we've emphasized that Stalin ranks with Hitler and Mao as one of the most reviled, murderous, and aggressive dictators in history, responsible for the deaths of tens of millions. We pointed out that Stalin helped start at least 4 wars: World War II, the war against Finland, the Cold War, and the Korean War. He helped start World War II in Europe by rejecting British and French overtures to deter the attack on Poland. Instead, he's signing a non-aggression pact with Germany and dividing and invading Poland. And then inviting or occupying 5 other countries, including the Baltic nations, deporting people and providing strategic resources to Germany early in World War II. He ordered the murder of 22,000 Polish prisoners in the 1940 Katyn massacre. In the Cold War, he enslaved Eastern Europe, blockaded Berlin, and in the Korean War, he gave North Korea the go-ahead to attack South Korea, provided military planning and military arms for the attack, later pressed the Chinese to intervene, and pressed the communist forces to persevere when they ran into problems, in a war which cost over 37,000 American lives and over 1 million South Korean were dead. We pointed out that erecting a bust of Stalin in America flies in the face of history when statues of Stalin and the former Soviet Union and elsewhere have been torn down. We have said that the memorial's purpose and stewardship have been violated by erecting a bust of Stalin when you have 10 busts or statues of U.S. Army soldiers, but you have no statuary honoring the Allied D-Day participants from the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Army Air Forces, the Coast Guard, the Merchant Marine, and the forces of 9 of the Allied D-Day participants whose flags fly at the memorial, but you have a bust of Joseph Stalin. We've been pointed out that the Stalin bust is offensive to many and will likely lead to reductions in financial contributions, volunteering, and visitation for the memorial. Because the memorial is facing financial problems, they've been running in a deficit. The Congress authorized a study of the feasibility of the National Park Service incorporating the National D-Day Memorial in the National Park system. And we have expressed our doubt that the Congress or the administration would take over a memorial that features the bust of Joseph Stalin. We've also pointed out the overwhelming opposition to the bust. Local media polls have run 80 to 95% against the bust, and over 90% of petition signers at an open forum in Bedford opposed the bust. The Bedford County Board of Supervisors, all 7 of them, unanimously declared their opposition to the bust. The American Legion in its national convention stated that the American Legion feels it is inappropriate to display the bust of Joseph Stalin in any location at the National D-Day Memorial. Thanks to Carl's efforts, the internet petition against the bust has registered more than 4,600 people from all 50 states and over 40 countries who have stated their opposition to the Stalin bust. Then among the various organizations that have opposed it is the Central and East European Coalition, representing more than 20 million Americans who trace their ancestry to that area. They have opposed the bust. Many members of the European Parliament have expressed their opposition, as has the longest-serving member of the Virginia General Assembly and 2 U.S. congressmen. As a result of this opposition, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that the foundation on September the 28th removed the Stalin bust, along with the bust of Chiang Kai-shek. The bad news is that the foundation has stated that they plan to reinstall the bust along with a collection of the other political busts at some new location at the memorial. I think instead of being 95 yards to the east of the bust, it'll be 165 yards south of not the bust, excuse me, the Victory Arch, about 165 yards south of the arch. There's a small area for the memorial. Can we influence the foundation? The foundation is a private entity, but federal, state, and local governments have played a role, and private donations account for most income. U.S. law has granted the memorial a national title and authorized the ongoing study about the National Park Service taking it over. President George W. Bush actually came down for the dedication of the memorial in 2001. Admiral Mullen, who was there last year for the June 6th ceremony. They've had military bands and color guards there. The IRS has granted the memorial a 501c3 charitable organization status. Bedford City holds the title to most of the property surrounding the area. And while federal funds have not been used at the memorial, the Commonwealth of Virginia has contributed over $7 million, and the Bedford County has contributed $700,000. So what can we do? We can individually and as organizations express our opposition to the Stalin bust by writing the foundation, writing commentaries and letters for the newspapers, writing blogs or sending emails, contacting your congressional representatives, and contacting the National Park Service and the Department of the Interior as they do that feasibility study. And I happen to have copies of some of the ways you can contact these people if you'd like. And I have little slips if any of you would like to get those afterwards. So I thank you for your support, and thank you for your opposition to the Stalin bust.
Thank you. Ed Ugar?
I wanted to give my sincere thanks to JBANC for inviting us to participate in this conference. We are honored to be among you today. I also would like to congratulate JBANC on its 50th anniversary, and I and many Circassians see the Baltic nation's success and achievements in freedom and democracy as a very inspiring. It provides us with the hope that one day we may have similar freedom and democracy for all Caucasus nations. The Caucasus is the isthmus between the Black and the Caspian Sea. It's the natural geographical border between Europe and Asia, and it has the highest mountain range in Europe. Circassia is part of the Caucasus. It's the motherland of Circassians since times predating recorded history. It lies on the northwestern slope of the range, occupies about 55,000 square kilometers, about 10,000 kilometers perhaps smaller than Estonia, with a shoreline stretches on the Black Sea for about 250 kilometers. Sochi was the last capital and the main city of Circassia up until the Russian occupation and destruction of Circassia and its people. This was during the Circassian genocide. It started in the 18th century when Russia desired to find its route and outlet to the warm waters. Circassia and its independent and freedom-loving people were in the way. The war resulted in the total destruction of Circassia and all its resources, massacring more than 40% of the estimated 3 million Circassian population, expelling in a forced deportation more than 90% of the remaining population that remained alive. Many of them perished on the routes of exile. Russia achieved its declared policy at the time, Circassia without Circassians. One of the concentration camps the Circassians, during the Circassian forced deportation was Sochi. Actually, the entire coastline of Circassia was the stage of the last part of the Circassian genocide. Death, famine, hunger, diseases were recorded scenes abundantly documented by Russians and others of witnesses who witnessed the atrocities committed against this small nation. Today, more than 90% of Circassians live in diaspora community outside Circassia. Despite very strong and difficult circumstances of assimilation, loss of identity, we managed both in our motherland and in diaspora to preserve in a remarkable way many elements of our Circassian identity. One of the most devastating and potentially dangerous elements against us is the infiltration, influence, and control of Russian intelligence services in our communities inside and outside Circassia. The worst part of this control is the one existed in our diaspora organizations, including ones in the United States of America. The control has increased many times since we started spreading awareness about the grim facts about the Circassian genocide. Russia started to give more attention to our people inside and outside the Caucasus after Mr. Putin was able to secure Sochi to be the place where the 2014 Winter Olympic Games will be held, or at least planned to be held. Russia is concerned today that 6 million Circassian diaspora and almost 1 million in motherland will become aware of their rights as outlined in the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous People Rights of June 29, 2006. Russia is also concerned that Circassians may eventually be able to convince the International Olympic Commission to reconsider its decision awarding the Sochi to be the 2013 Winter Olympic city. It is in violation of the International Olympic Organization Charter to hold the games where mass murders were committed. And Sochi is one of the places where the entire Circassian nation was massacred, and what remains of this nation is still outside Circassia, till today, not allowed to go back. Circassian genocide was on last Monday we had a conference in Rutgers University run by the Center for Genocide and Conflict Resolution, one of the leading centers in the nation about genocide studies and conflict resolution and preventions of genocide. And Mr. Greg Staton, the president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, stated that the Circassian genocide was the first genocide in modern times. The world turned a blind eye in that genocide. The Ottomans were witnessing that genocide because many Circassians ended up in Turkey. The Turks later on, a few years later, they decided, well, if the Circassians were genocided and nobody said anything, that we could do the same thing with the Armenians, and then the Armenian genocide happened. A few years later, somebody in Europe who was appeased by the International Olympic Committee was awarded to hold the Olympics in his country at that time, during or about or somewhere around World War II. That person said that who cares about the Armenian? Who knows about the Armenian? And we know what later on happened to 6 million Jews in Germany. We have to consider that this also, or the Darfur genocide and the Rwanda genocide, was as a result of the world turning blind eyes on such murders and such abuse of human rights and such atrocities committed against the people of small nations. We ask you to consider that awarding the Sochi Olympics to Russia over the graves and the lands where Circassians were genocided will not help in preventing any future genocide against any people of the world. Thank you very much.
Donna?
We bathos well. That is good day in Circassian. I cannot imagine Circassians addressing such a group of distinguished people in my native language, and I sincerely thank you, and especially JBANC, for this tremendous opportunity. Today, I am not speaking to you as an expert on Sochi or the Circassian struggle, but as a young Circassian, a proud Adiga, and I am concerned with the treatment of my nation and the future of all Circassians. In our homeland, the Northwest Caucasus, we are losing all indigenous rights, face violence, death, and major human rights abuses. There's a daily uncertainty about the remainder of our republics and a growing threat of extremism due to the harsh living conditions and ethnic tensions propagated by the Kremlin. In diaspora, we lack any real repatriation rights to our homeland. Our organizations are Russian-controlled, and we face the same cultural genocide that our brothers in Circassia face. We are the indigenous people of the North Caucasus. We were exiled from our land 147 years ago, which really isn't a long time ago. Sochi, the primary subject of my slideshow, is the last capital of Circassia. And as my colleague mentioned, many study that this genocide was the blueprint for future crimes against humanity. I'll talk about what brought about Circassian activism as shaped by the No Sochi 2014 campaign and the effects it has had to this day. Much of this may be very familiar to you, since it is the same noble struggle that you endured and overcame for your freedoms, and I applaud you. I'll begin on May 21st, 1864, a date I believe to be the most important in Circassian history. Everything can be measured before May 21, 1864, and after. The Russian government openly declared its position on Circassians then and for the future to come. If the Circassian nation still existed wholly today, this is what it would look like. Today, all that's left of the Circassian people in the Northwest Caucasus exists in green. 90% of our nation lives outside its homeland, Circassia. This statistic about Circassian population in the Northwest Caucasus revealed the legacy of colonization, forced migration, and genocide. This is the largest percentage of any nation living in diaspora today. Let's look at this again. Then and now. Krasnaya Polanya was one of the final and fiercest battles. In fact, the Russian meaning for Krasnaya Polanya is Red Hill, for the amount of Circassian blood that was shed at the time. On May 21, 1864, the Russian army paraded together and celebrated their final victory. A line of Russian soldiers were being awarded for massacring my nation. Now, Krasnaya Polanya is planned to hold many venues for the Sochi Olympics. The world will travel to Sochi on the 150th anniversary of my nation's total destruction. The international audience will not be watching amazing feats of sportsmanship, peace, and humanity. Instead, they will be witnessing the completion in the last chapter of the Circassian genocide, while ensuring the world's total denial of my Circassian people. July 4, 2007. The IOC awards Russia the Sochi 2014 Winter Olympics. In his first ever English language address to the world, then President Putin thanked the IOC for their selection of Sochi. He says, the ancient Greeks lived around Sochi lots of centuries ago. Cossacks have also been mentioned as the indigenous people of the land. Notice how President Putin and the Russian government had no intention of ever mentioning the indigenous Circassians. Doing so would raise questions like, what happened to these people? Where did they go? July 23, 2007. The Circassians react with a rallying cry, no Sochi Olympics on the land of genocide. Circassian organizations from all over the world sent letters to the IOC, one before the selection informing the IOC of Sochi's true past, and another condemning the decision and asking for an investigation. September 20, 2007. The IOC responds saying that they would look into our concerns and open investigations into the venue. After several more letters, and nearly 5 years later, we have yet to hear anything more from the IOC. October 4, 2007. A few weeks after the IOC's response to us, the first demonstration against the Sochi Olympics and demands for genocide recognition occur. This is a monumental moment for Circassians. It set off a wave of activism and reawakening throughout the entire Circassian world. 2008. 2008 is marked by several highly publicized conferences in Washington, D.C., Harvard University, and William Patterson University. The genocide and the future of the Circassian people are finally being discussed on an academic level. May 21, 2009. The urgency and need to tell the world what happened to our people really galvanizes the entire Circassian nation. January 2010. The Circassian organizations opposing the Sochi Olympics unite to create a strong lobby called the No Sochi 2014 Committee. The first public act is staging a mass demonstration at the Vancouver Olympics. February 2010. Members of the No Sochi 2014 Committee stage a major protest in front of Russia's Sochi House, which was touted to be Russia's Olympic gateway to the world. This moment truly makes an impact for Circassians all over the Caucasus and throughout the diaspora. More importantly, the world and the media start to take notice. Prominent news outlets such as The Economist, Newsweek, The New York Times, and Foreign Affairs start discussing the genocide, Sochi 2014, and the Circassian question. In fact, The Economist alludes that holding an Olympics in Sochi is like holding a sporting event on the Sioux Nation's Black Hills. February 17, 2010. The World Wildlife Fund of Russia issues a statement. It is putting a halt to its cooperation with Olympustroy. The ecologists announced that preparation for the Olympics has gone out of control, the quality of construction is poor, and great damage to the surrounding environment has already been caused and will continue. Greenpeace of Russia also ceases consultations with the Russian government in regards to Sochi. They state that Russian authorities have launched a costly ad campaign to distort the real situation and hide potential damage to unique natural complexes. I would also like to add that in 2006, Greenpeace also filed a lawsuit with Russia's Supreme Court to block the construction of a number of sporting facilities and infrastructure around Sochi. They, of course, lost. Sergei Volkov, a leading Russian scientist, was the first to raise the alarm. He is now in Ukraine, hiding arrest from Russian authorities. He says, "We have found large deposits of dangerous radioactive materials." Sergei Avdiev, mayor of Krasnaya Polania, says he is very concerned about the potentially disastrous impact of all the construction work. And for years, environmental activists around Sochi are being jailed for capturing footage and telling the world of the construction's damaging effects on the environment. Like my nation was destroyed 147 years ago, the land that we have called home for thousands of years and still call home is being destroyed. March 20, 2010. A Circassian delegation presents a resolution to the Parliament of Georgia to recognize the Circassian genocide. Later in March, after seeing the surge of Circassian activism in the diaspora, Russian-controlled Circassian organizations in the Caucasus feel the pressure to finally make a statement. After 3 years of Sochi selection, 3 years, one such organization, the International Circassian Association, or the ICA, says the following statement: Circassian elements and symbols should be used in this opening ceremony, and that the history and culture of the Adiga people be taken into consideration. The ICA also states that doing so will ease the pressure and quiet the voices of the No Sochi 2014 committee, which they dub as radical forces. May 21, 2010. Demonstrations have dramatically increased in size and its effect on the Circassian population. New York City, Istanbul, Antalya, Nalchik, Israel, Berlin, Munich, and Vienna. On the same day, thousands of Circassians throughout the world chant, Sochi, land of genocide. October 1, 2010. Members of the International Circassian Council and the No Sochi 2014 Committee traveled to Estonia and the European Parliament to discuss the No Sochi 2014 campaign. Later that month, the European Green Party issues a statement. They have condemned the decision by the Russian government to remove land from Sochi National Park and give it to the city of Sochi. By the new year, Temur Izbalov resigns as the president of the State Cooperation Olympustroy, which is responsible for all the Olympics infrastructure. Allegations of his direct involvement in mass corruption in Sochi led to his dismissal. Estimates of Olympic costs are $50 billion, with nearly $30 billion lost to corruption. And really, how can the world award an Olympics to a country where serious human rights abuses occur daily, where hundreds of journalists are being killed, and where a serious human security issue will exist at the time of the Games? December 29, 2010. 2010 ended with a prominent Circassian advocate. Aslan Tsipin was gunned down near his home in the Caucasus. Circassians around the world are forced to ask, why was the man that championed Adiga beliefs and traditions violently murdered? The last chapter in any successful genocide is the one in which the oppressor can remove their hands and say, my God, what are these people doing to themselves? They're killing each other. This is how the Russians came to occupy Circassia and the entire North Caucasus. They continue to do so today, with the same policies of oppression, violence, inter-ethnic strife, and lack of economic development. A long time ago, a series of events was set in motion to control the Caucasus and eliminate its indigenous element. Today, the Russian government continues on a daily basis to commit the many forms of genocide against all the indigenous peoples of the Caucasus. However, the free and democratic world, and especially the European countries, can hold Russia accountable. As Tuna Kalam, member of the European Parliament, wrote in October, a boycott of the Sochi Olympics by Western nations cannot be ruled out. Dispatching an EU fact-finding mission composed of independent observers and experts to the region is one of the necessary first steps to acquire objective information about the Circassian situation, as well as to assess the risks and costs of these Sochi Olympics. So I conclude with this call to action. Help us tell the world. Before the Sochi 2014 Olympics, let everyone know the crimes of Imperial Russia, the abhorrent human rights abuses in Russia today, and the immorality of holding an Olympics in Sochi. I hope the world makes a conscious decision. And my wish for my nation is to one day celebrate the freedoms and democracy like you are doing today. Whipso, thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce our final speaker, Polius Vertelka.
I'll make some technical alterations here. Good afternoon. It's an honor for me to be here today. For the past few years, I had the pleasure to work for Lithuanian American Council and serve as president for the Lithuanian Student Association of North America. Let us review LAC history prior to the formation of JBANC. LAC origins date back to 1915 when Lithuanian American organizations organized the Lithuanian American Council to promote Lithuania's independence from Tsarist Russia. LAC collected 1 million signatures to prevail upon President Harding that the US officially recognized the statehood of the Republic of Lithuania. He did that in 1922 when he also recognized Estonia and Latvia as well. After the massive Soviet military invasion into Lithuania on June 15, 1940, the leadership of LAC met with President Roosevelt to seek the US support to the restoration of the Lithuanian sovereignty. During the meeting, President Franklin D. Roosevelt assured LAC delegates that Lithuania did not lose its independence. Lithuania's independence was only temporarily put aside. Time will come and Lithuania will be free again. This statement continued to fuel the determination of LAC to pursue the independence of Lithuania for the next 50 years. In 1941, soon after the meeting with President Roosevelt, the Lithuanian Americans met in Chicago, where they officially incorporated the Lithuanian American Council as a nonprofit corporation in the state of Illinois. LAC functions as a federation where each member organization supports and complements each other. Each organization brings specific strengths and traditions which work in a synergistic manner. The same type of structure was used to form JBANC and the Lithuanian Student Association of North America. JBANC unites the efforts of 3 Baltic American organizations, while LSANA is composed of university-level organizations. LAC established 3 fundamental goals: to unite all Lithuanian Americans in quest for basic human rights, to support world efforts to establish permanent peace based on international law, and to restore the independence of Lithuania. As the activities of LAC expanded, so did its membership. Initially, LAC encompassed 4 organizations. Today, LAC is composed of 18 national organizations. In pursuit of LAC goals, the Council met with President Truman in 1946 and 1952, and President Eisenhower in 1953 and 1956. By the time JBANC was established, LAC had successfully achieved the commitment from the US government not to recognize the legality of Soviet occupation of the Baltic states. Thomas Navratil, a former deputy director at the Office of Nordic and Baltic Affairs at the US Department of State, said, "I believe that the Lithuanian American Council impressing for the US government to refuse to recognize the occupation of the Baltic states was among the first to exercise this right with regard to a grievance outside the United States." Additionally, the LAC persuaded the US Congress to initiate congressional hearings on Soviet occupation of the Baltic states, the so-called historian Kirsten Committee hearings. After 1961, LAC leaders continued meeting with presidents of the United States, frequently with their Baltic colleagues. Pictured is the meeting with President John F. Kennedy in 1962. Please note, Pijus Grigaitis, LAC secretary, and Leonardas Šimutis, LAC president, standing respectively to right and left of the US president. These 2 men were the LAC signatories of the founding document creating JBANC in 1961. In pursuit of JBANC goals, the leaders met with President Johnson in 1964. In the picture here is Leonard Šimutis, LAC president and JBANC co-founder. Furthermore, Baltic leaders were received by President Ronald Reagan in the Oval Office. After the Baltics regained their independence, LAC updated its goals to further assist Lithuania and its Baltic neighbors. LAC directs its efforts towards the establishment of strong economic base, development of energy security, and self-sufficiency. LAC continues to confront any Moscow disinformation about the Baltic states. It also promotes Baltic studies and Lithuania's positive image among media outlets. Over the last 20 years, LAC has restated its goals in response to new challenges. In order to promote Baltic study and research, LAC has committed itself to the development of Baltic Institute. The introduction of recent Lithuanian immigrants to LAC activities has become an important LAC goal. LAC continues to seek to expand the number of member organizations and plans to index its expansive archives for research purposes. In order to effectively achieve its goals, LAC has adopted and continues to seek new possibilities through the use of digital social media and its new website located at www.altcenter.org. Through the encouraging efforts of the LAC president Saulius Kuprys, In the summer of 2009, a group of third-wave Lithuanian Americans re-established the Lithuanian Student Association of North America. The reorganized LSANA became a forum to pass on the legacy of LAC and JBANC activism to a new generation of highly motivated Lithuanian American students. LSANA, just as LAC and JBANC, is based on federation structure. Currently, LSANA encompasses 3 member organizations: LSA UIC, the Baltic Club at U of I, and the most recent member, LSA DePaul. The first public event to mark the rebirth of the LSANA took place in August 2009, where a large group of friends of founders of LSANA attended a picnic. Students brought their own food, donated $5 each, and launched an official membership registration. LSANA, in cooperation with its first organization member, the LSANA at University of Illinois at Chicago, and the Lithuanian Language Department at UIC, organized a meeting with former Lithuanian President Valdas Adamkus. In the same year, members of LSANA were invited to attend the centennial celebration of the Lithuanian American daily newspaper Draugas, and met with a member of the European Union Parliament, Vytautas Landsbergis. Meetings such as these formed a significant basis for future LSANA activities. LSANA members have actively participated in the Baltic Leadership Conference in the fall of 2010. The conference focused on Baltic awareness and JBANC activities. At the conference, I had the honor to announce that LSANA was initiating its first major project to fund scholarship to enable deserving students to attend this JBANC conference. LSANA seeks also to organize fun activities such as snowboarding trips to foster new friendships and network in an informal environment. Such events proved to be highly effective in drawing attention to the organization and promoting LSA activities among potential new members. LSANA seeks to promote individual activism and professionalism. Our meetings serve as an effective forum for programmatic discussions and defining specific projects. A major project LSANA promoted this year was underwriting a scholarship for LSANA members to attend this conference. Thanks to generous support of the Lithuanian American Council, the Baltic Nations Committee of Michigan, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania, and private individuals, we were able to award 7 scholarships. These students are currently sitting amongst you, so I would like to ask the LSANA scholarships recipients to stand to show that they indeed made it to this JBANC conference. Thank you. LSANA has recently shown an extraordinary growth in its activities and membership. I have noticed that in preparation for any formal Baltic function, a number of students will approach their parents prior to the event asking if they would fund the purchase of their very first suit. I found these situations to be very satisfying because it shows that LSANA has encouraged students to enter a professional world where they represent Lithuania and the Baltic states to a wider American public, build new connections, and advance professionally. These students are becoming the future leaders of Baltic American activism. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all of our presenters. I know that we're running a little late, but are there any questions for our panelists? They did a great job, right? Okay, back there, yes.
Well, quick follow-up on my previous statement about paying people, and it's related to a lot of what was discussed on this panel, and Ed Lucas's comment specifically, that our narrative is not yet finished. I thought that was a brilliantly phrased point. And we have to take, I was speaking with one of the panelists, Marcus Kolga, in private prior to this about the importance of taking ownership and command and control of our own history, writing it, recording it, filming it, and telling it before somebody else does. Along those lines, this was just an idea, an example, and I'd like the panel's comments on this as a potential idea. For there are right now precious few Baltic studies chairs endowed at different universities in the United States. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could raise enough money collectively to endow such chairs at all major universities in the United States, and even some abroad, to perpetuate and record and identify outstanding Baltic scholars, for example, among today's conference attendees, who would fill these positions and be paid for teaching and writing and recording about Baltic history? Just a thought.
Anybody want to comment?
Actually, in Toronto, we have a group who's been meeting regularly for the past 20 years, once a week, recording those oral histories on film. And I think in the Tartu College archive, there are about 1,500, if not more, maybe even 2,000 interviews from every age group in the Estonian community, starting from about 1990. So I think it would be fantastic if I don't know if in Lakewood they've done this at the archives there, but certainly in Toronto they've done it. And it's a fabulous, fabulous archive.
We also still have Terry Schultz on the line, so if anybody has a question for her. Okay, any other questions for our panelists? And I'd like to say thank you to all of you for your time and your comments, and I would like to invite up to the podium our new incoming JBANC president for some final remarks. Mario? No. Oh, you know whose it is? I know whose it is. It's audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our conference. I hope that you have all enjoyed it and learned from it as much as I have, and I thank you all for coming. We owe the success of this conference to a number of people. First of all, our speakers. I won't mention them by name again, but I want to sincerely thank them for taking the time to come and provide us with their insightful comments on topics of interest to all of us. We owe thanks to Congressman Mike Rogers of Michigan and his staff, who together with the Capitol Visitor Center event staff helped us with the auditorium and logistics for yesterday's program. And of course, the Latvian Embassy's reception yesterday honoring President Zottlers was a highlight of the conference. I'd like to mention the volunteers at our registration desk, and also Marcus Kolga for his considerable help with the conference. Most of all, I want to thank the local JBANC board members whose names are in the program, and in particular, Carl Altau, JBANC's managing director, and Peter Cherison, his able assistant. Without them, we would not have been able to organize this conference. Please give them a round of applause. We have heard something about JBANC's 50 years and its achievements during this conference. I think that the preservation and never say die attitude in JBANC that helped keep up the push for the Baltic countries' independence is one that we need to continue to keep alive. The cooperation the three Baltic American parent organizations of JBANC and their respective communities have shown is a model that works, and I hope will continue far into the future. The leadership of JBANC rotates among the three parent organizations every year, and today the Estonian American National Council takes up the leadership for the coming year. We will work to ensure that JBANC continues to disseminate information, maintain contacts, and work with Congress and the administration to keep alive issues of importance to us. We do not know what the future holds or whether an ominous spotlight will reappear in the Baltics, but we do know that we must continue to be ready should events threaten the welfare or independence of Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia. Your support of JBANC and its work is as important for the future as it was in the past. I'd now like to invite you to our cash bar reception, which will be held in the same room as we had our lunch, downstairs in Ballroom 1. Again, thank you for coming, and I look forward to seeing you at our next conference. Thank you.
Thank you. We're working with the American Council on the page and introducing Facebook into news spreading, and perhaps we might have some interesting ideas.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. I mean, our idea is specifically to look at, let's say, Lithuanian issues, have them published in English, and present them in a context that would be interesting for them.
Thank you very much.
That's the interesting aspect you mentioned. I just
Thank you.
wonder what kind of approach you used to. I mean, you mentioned that there are. Oh.
Yes.
So it's not about.
Well, it's
Oh, okay.
where this is being broadcast, or the media that I was talking about. Well, the media that I was talking about is up north.
I'll keep that in mind then. Baltic studies. Okay. Hey, thank you.
And there's a. Oh, this one I. Okay. I'm gonna try to remember.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
TV. And I think it's. So you can go to JBank. I think there's a link to the.
This one?
But then this has sort of a prospectus on what we're planning on doing. That sort of some interactive stuff, a sample of our radio show over the last week.
You summarize everything that we have in mind for you, but you actually didn't, so we wanted to.
Yes, it's an experiment.
Could be.
Still,
Oh, you know,
definitely that'll help.
That's it. Those wild issue. Yep, that's right. Yeah. The Buslov, yeah, that's a couple of years old. It's an incredible history. 10,000, well, you're just over 10,000 gone. It's because they're Germans. What's scary is that 8,000 of those 10,000 were women and children. Yeah. And there were other ships as well. Yes. Well, yeah, it drives me nuts. Even my own kids, well, they're excited to read books about the Titanic. Just keep in mind, it's fine, but that's not the worst. So, sorry, it's it's interesting how you have this idea of North American contribution, yes. Well, like I was saying, the Estonians and everything was very interesting. People like me who would push out the English version of the news. I know the context of it. So the key is to give a lot of context and bring things in. I think that's that and also less centralization. That's a great idea. Yeah, it's back on again. There's mine, so I'll stop by. Yeah, stop by. I'm just going to check it. Are you staying for a I think for a short bit, yeah.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.